Chapter 76, Filial Son. Zhou Yinzi is a public door. There has always been a saying here, called entering the yamen to pick up a layer of skin. This kind of thing is not uncommon when the officials rule the Qingming dynasty, and it is naturally commonplace when the court situation is unstable. Jin Yiwei has already caused a lot of complaints in the government and the opposition, and this kind of thing is even more familiar with it, and he can be called the best among them. If you commit a crime, the richer you have no power, the better, and if you put them in prison for 7 days, they are so frightened that they are all broken, and the family is naturally worried, holding the silver up and down, lest the adults in the public gate not accept it. This is well done. If you are ruthless, it doesn't matter if you are a sufferer or a criminal, as soon as a lawsuit is entangled, they will all be arrested and imprisoned in the name of detention pending trial, and then the offender will have to bribe the chief, and even the sufferer will have to destroy his wealth and eliminate the disaster. If you don't give money, it's easy. Confused officials judge the court case, regardless of whether you are guilty or innocent, you will be punished with one stroke. When she came from the yamen today, Zhou Yinzi was on the way thinking about what Jiang Xuning wanted to do, and when she went to the tea house, she took a look at it. Although she was clear about her relationship with Yu Fangyin everywhere in her words, and she held Yu everywhere, it seemed that everything was for Yu's good, but the expression of this bitter master looked like that. After a little thought, he guessed that she was going to treat Yu. Jin Yiwei is running an errand outside, and he is a new Qinhu, and he doesn't dare to be too blatant towards Jiang Xuning, but he is not ambiguous. No matter how others arrest people first, what to do next is only to listen to Jiang Xuning. But he didn't expect Jiang Xuning to have such an idea. The piano is too expensive. That's when money is tight. Zhou Yinzi nodded, neither showing any surprise, nor any beak, but said, "I understand. Yanlin has given her a lot of things in the past, but it will take a while for those things to be sold. Jiang Xuning certainly has some money in her hands, but when she encounters such a thing as the disaster of the Yanji Marquis mansion, even if there is a lot of silver, she is afraid that it is not enough, and she is determined to get the artesian well salt farm, and she has enough money in her hand to prevent it from happening and ensure that there is no loss. Since Yu has committed a crime in her hands, she is considered unlucky. Today, she was doing a show, but she didn't expect Yu Fangyin to risk her life to protect each other, and she picked up the bench to deal with Yu. If you stop here and let Yu take her back to the house like this, she will have to be beaten severely. Jiang Xuning really didn't want to think about that scene. Don't dare. It is better to report to the official first, arrest people in prison, and let Zhou Yinzi eat and drink well, then go back to the house to be tortured. In any case, let's avoid this period for the first time, and then think about whether there is a way to solve it once and for all. Jiang Xuning pinched her eyebrows lightly, and said, Yu is also the companion of the eldest princess of Liang in the palace. You should return to the palace in 2 days. You can handle this matter, don't make too much trouble. After all, you haven't been down for a long time as a thousand household. Even if you have a meritorious role in the case of collusion between the Marquis of Yanji and the King of Pingnan, you can't stand up to the limelight, and it won't be good if you are regarded as a thorn in the side. Zhou Yinzi's pupils suddenly shrank. Jiang Xuning didn't say anything, she was still ordinary, and only continued, I have been in the palace these days, and I know the affairs of the Marquis of Yanji's mansion are ominous, so you can talk about it. This tea house was empty, and as soon as the people of Jin Yiwei came to take people, they all left empty. But after all, it was such a big battle just now. Zhou Yinzi was cautious in handling things, but it was inconvenient to talk here, and he wanted to invite Jiang Xuning to his humble house. Originally, Jiang Xuning came today to meet Ren Weizi for a while, and she encountered Yu's accident. No matter how you look at it, today is not a good time to do something, and since Yu Fangyin has already seen it, she actually doesn't have much need to come forward again. So I agreed. After putting down the tea, she and Zhou Yin went out of the tea house. Jiang Xunning's carriage was on the side of the road. Zhou Yinzi came on horseback. It's just that now this white horse is no longer the original horse that has been raised for 2 years. Jiang Xuning glanced at it and remembered the incident she heard from Yan Lin not long ago. Zhou Yinzi killed the horse. In the last life, Zhou Yinzi married Yao Shi. And later, this person also joined forces with Chen Ying to frame Zhang Sha, so that he sat in prison for several months, until Xie Wei rebelled. Zhou Yinzi's head was taken off by Xie Wei and hung high at the palace gate. Thinking of this, she was a little gloomy. The driver had already placed a footstool under the wheels. Jiang Xuning walked over and held Tang Er and Lianer's hands to get into the car. But she never expected that when she raised her eyes by chance, she swept the door of a pharmacy diagonally across the street, and happened to bump into a pair of silent, calm eyes. The green hairpin is tied up and meticulous, and the plain blue robe is extremely simple, but it looks very suitable for him. He also carried a small bag of medicine in his hand. Zhang Sha stood quietly at the door of the pharmacy, not knowing whether he had just come out or had been standing here for a long time. At this moment, Jiang Xunning's body stiffened, all movements stopped, and there was a buzz in his head, which turned out to be blank. Zhang Sha withdrew his gaze at this moment, retracted his gaze at her, and also retracted his gaze at Zhou Yinzi beside her, bowed his head slightly, and then turned around and walked along the crowded street, carrying the medicine he had just grasped, and slowly walked away. Lianer followed her gaze, only saw a thin figure, and she didn't know who it was, and she was a little confused. Girl. Jiang Xuning raised her hand and pressed her heart a little harder. She felt panicked. Obviously just such an ordinary glance, the current Zhang Sha may not know Zhou Yinzi, who has just taken office, but she has tasted the continued discomfort and guilt. Zhou Yinzi is undoubtedly not a good stubble. In his previous life, he hated her for being in the company of such people, and she couldn't get out of this life for the time being, and if she wanted to go around in this Shura field, she had to use such a person first. Zhou Yinzi saw that her expression was different, and secretly speculated about the identity of that person. Jiang Xuning slowly turned her head to look at him. There was a bit of a trance in his eyes, as if he had seen something else through him, and at the end there was a faint melancholy. Zhou Yinzi never denied the beauty of the woman in front of him. As early as when he was still in the countryside, he had been taught. But this is the first time. For the first time, he was moved by the look in her eyes that he couldn't understand. He said, "Is there anything wrong with the second girl?" Jiang Xuning blinked, looked at the tall man in a flying fish suit, still as if in a dream, and said slowly, "I really hope that you won't do anything too bad in the future, or, if you do it, hide it better, don't let me know." Zhou Yinzi raised his eyes to look at her. Jiang Xuning lowered her eyes, pulled the corners of her lips wordlessly, turned around and stepped on the footstool, and got into the carriage. Asterisk. In the early winter afternoon, located in the east of the city, Yao Shangshu Mansion, the courtyard is quiet and elegant. Although the outer door is closed, the corridor inside is long, but there are maids and women walking around and laughing from time to time. Yao Shi heard the report and ran to his father's study with great joy. Before anyone even had time to pass it on, he couldn't wait to ask, "Daddy, did Zhang Sha send someone to deliver the letter? What did you write?" Yao Qingyu is in his 50s this year. Yao Shi is his youngest daughter and his only daughter, and she has always been treated like a pearl in the palm of her hand, so no one reprimands her for acting inappropriately on weekdays. When the little girl saw her go in, she didn't have a good time. But Yao Qingyu sat behind the bookcase, looking at the letter that had been opened, but a layer of dark clouds gradually appeared on his aged face. Yao Shi has always been pampered, and she wanted to know the news related to her marriage, and she didn't notice Yao Qingyu's face when she came in, but saw the open envelope on the side at a glance. so she noticed the letter that Yao Qingyu was reading. She immediately leaned over. My daughter wants to see it too. She picked up the letter. On the simple plain white letterhead is the familiar handwriting that Yao Shi has secretly read many times when she was in the palace, stroke by stroke, clear and steady, and the force penetrates the back of the paper, just like the person she saw in Sinning Palace that day. The letter was addressed to Yao Qingyu, but she somehow was full of shyness when she saw this word, and her face felt hot. This time I made up my mind before I looked down. In the letter, Zhang Xia first asked Yao Qingyu how well, and then recounted the experience of the two families before and after the marriage, and said that Yao's house was good. Yao Shi really became more and more ashamed the more he looked at it, and he couldn't help muttering in his heart, this person looked at the cold letter but still knew that it was likable. But as soon as this thought passed, the next line of words had jumped into her eyes, making all her previous joyful expressions freeze on her face. How could it be? She hurriedly read these lines twice, but her originally beautiful face was faintly distorted, her body trembled, and she clenched the letterhead, unwilling to believe it. Why does he still want to quit his family? Father, why does he still want to quit? Yao Shi's tears swirled in her eyes, and she felt that all her previous shame and pleasure turned into a huge slap, which fell on her face and blinded her. I can't even save face. She couldn't accept it, so she only asked Yao Qingyu vigorously. Yao Qingyu raised his eyes, which had been soaked in the ups and downs of the years, looked at this daughter who had always been pampered by him, and remembered the reason why he had asked his subordinates to inquire before. He just couldn't believe it. At this moment, he didn't answer Yao Shi's words, but asked her, what you said in the palace and what you want to do, have you forgotten it now? Yao Shi didn't know, what? Yao Qingyu suppressed anger when he saw this letter finally exploded at this moment, slapped the table, suddenly got up, and asked loudly, when you wanted Zhang Xia to withdraw from your family, did you plot with people in the palace to ruin people's reputation and bad people's reputation? Yao Shi had never seen his father get so angry. She didn't react at this moment, and said in a daze, how could Daddy know? When Yao Qingyu heard her words, he almost couldn't hold back a slap and was about to hit him. But after all, this is his favorite daughter. The hand was raised high, but in the end it did not fall, but dropped the paperweight on the desk, and his voice changed in anger, how could I raise such a daughter as you? That Zhang Yuan is my painstaking and colorless for you, with a dignified character and a patient temperament, although his reputation is not obvious now, it will become a great weapon in time. You lard your heart to see that he is down for a while and wants to withdraw from his family, and his father can't bear to let you marry and suffer. Who would have thought that you would have planned such harmful thoughts in order to withdraw from your family? People are afraid of the face of your girl's family, and it is not good to explain the reason to me in the letter, and only blame yourself for the resignation, but what you have done, everyone knows. My Yao's face has been lost by you. It's really like a thunderbolt on a sunny day, and it hits your head down. Yao Shi was stunned. Only then did she know why Zhang Xia had withdrawn from her family, and her whole heart was discouraged for a while, and she took 2 steps back abruptly, as if she was a little unsteady, and only murmured, how would he know, how could he know? Yao Qingyu said coldly, if people don't know unless you don't do it. If you do this kind of thing, it's not unusual for others to know about it. Yao Shi felt that her face had been hurt, and she pinched the page of the letterhead, and she gritted her teeth and said, impossible. That is just a joke in the palace, how can Zhang Xia know? How can a poor and sinister family member from such a prominent lintel of our Yao mansion withdraw from his family? He also has an old mother at home, and he is so happy when he knows about this family business, and it is impossible for him to withdraw from his family. Someone must be secretly instigating, Father, there must be someone secretly provoking and wanting to harm my family business. When Yao Qingyu heard this, he felt cold. He looked at her speechless. Yao Shi suddenly had a bright face in her mind that made her jealous, tears fell from her eyes, and she gritted her teeth and repeated, someone must be secretly provoking. Asterisk. Zhang Xia returned home with the medicine. An inconspicuous old door in the depths of the alley, when pushed open, does not look like an official door, only a small one enters a simple courtyard, and there is a bamboo shelf for drying clothes on a clean bluestone slab, and his official uniform hangs on it. The sound of tables and chairs moving in the hall to the east could be heard. It's someone who is sweeping. The elderly woman, dressed in a coarse cloth garment and wearing an apron around her waist, was arranging the tables and chairs in the room and wiping them clean with a rag. When Zhang Xia walked in, she was putting a rag in a basin filled with water to wash. Looking up and seeing him, Zhang smiled at him. I'm back, what do you want to eat at night? Her husband died early, Zhang was widowed at a young age, and she grew up her son alone, and the traces left by the wind and frost of the years on her body were particularly cruel, and the corners of her eyes and eyebrows were carved one after another, which was completely different from those daughters in Beijing. At that time, the family was surrounded by walls, and it took her a lot of effort to ask the gentlemen in the school to accept Zhang Xia. But the cost of other schools is also high. Pen, ink, paper, inkstone, everything costs money. Zhang saved money to buy him on food and clothing, just thinking that he would gain fame and get ahead, and one day clear his father's grievances. She knew that her son was smart, and she also knew that if he read, he would be very powerful. But who would have thought that after a few years of studying, he hid from her to take the official examination of the Yamen that year. When the exam was completed, he came back and told her that he would not study or take the exam. She was so angry that she hit him with a rattan. While beating, he cried and scolded, "Think about how unjustly your father died, and what did he teach you back then? Those who don't succeed in the instrument don't grow up. What can officials do when they pass the exam? The government will only use things in a hurry, and if you don't need them, they will dismiss you. You have been doing things for others all your life, and you really want to be angry with me." Zhang Xia didn't hide or avoid at that time, so he knelt in front of his father's spirit and was beaten and scolded by her. His back was bloody. When he hit the back, Zhang threw away all the rattans, sat in the hall and cried, only hating himself for being incompetent, and a woman who had no ability to make money. How could she not know that her son went to the examination instead of taking the exam, because he knew that the family had no money and didn't want her to be so miserable? But the more she knew, the more uncomfortable she became. Since Zhang Xia served in the Yamen, he led the money given by the imperial court, although the life of the family is still poor, but it is gradually better than the original stretch. What Zhang didn't expect was that, after less than half a year, Henan Provincial Inspector Gu Chunfang inspected the government, Zhang Xia sued the injustice, and finally let the government retry his father's old case. After more than 10 years, Zhang Xia was also favored by Gu Chunfang. More than 2 years later, he was recommended to the imperial court, and the criminal department was given the matter, and he took off his official body and became a Beijing official. This small courtyard was placed by their mother and son when they first arrived in the capital. Originally, it was very dilapidated. But Zhang is diligent in tidying up, although he is still shabby and can't add many furnishings, but he looks popular and has the appearance of a home. Zhang Xia put the medicine he bought on the table, frowned and didn't speak, then stepped forward and took down the rag in Jiang's hand, put it in the wooden basin, and took the wooden basin aside, before saying, "I have already wiped it once yesterday, and there is no dust at home. You are not in good health, don't be tired anymore." He also had a cold face when he said this. Zhang Shi shook his head when he saw it, and only said, "Your face is always so stinky, and you are also hard to do things, you don't know how to hurt people at all. How can you marry a daughter-in-law in the future?" Zhang Xia pressed her to sit down and did not speak. Zhang Shi nagged, but it's okay if the marriage of the Yao mansion is withdrawn. It was indeed our Gao Pen, but we can't afford to do such a thing to harm others. And your hard temper of not being able to splash water, needles not being inserted, and not eating oil and salt is the same as your father. The young lady from a wealthy family is married to you, how many can bear it? Zhang Shi lowered his head to remove the medicine and did not answer. Zhang Shi looked at his silent nature, and said angrily, in the future, my mother will help you watch more. If you can meet a good girl who knows how to take care of people in the portal, it is best to be gentle and virtuous, and put you in your heart and endure you. Otherwise, one day your mother and I will go down to see your father, and we will still be worried in our hearts. The thread that tied the medicine bag had been untied, and the mixed herbs were scattered on the paper, and a bitter taste also spread, and Zhang Zhang's distinct fingers pressed against the corners of the paper, and did not move. All kinds of suffering in prison in the previous life seemed to come up again. It took a long time for him to suppress them all, and he also pressed down the eyes that were looking at him with joy under the dim palace wall, and the bottom of his heart ached. Fang raised his head to look at Zhang Shi, and said slowly, don't talk nonsense about this kind of thing. Chapter 77, Blackmail. In a courtyard deep in Shijihutong, Zhou Yinzi got up and sent Zhang Xuning to the door, and only said, if the second girl wants to visit Nau Fangyan, she has to wait later, so as not to be too crowded. The young lady followed behind him and also came out to send Zhang Xuning. Zhang Xuning said, then I'll go later. She went down the mossy steps in the crack in the doorway, but stopped and looked back at her mother, and said with a smile, thank you for the tea you made for me this time. The young lady was flattered. She is just Zhou Yinzi's maidservant, and I don't know how this noble person who has great kindness in his own family can be so polite to herself, and hurriedly said, there is no good tea reception when I come back, and my mother's craftsmanship is coarse. I am afraid that the girl is not used to drinking, so you can like it. Zhang Xuning said goodbye and left, and went home first. Asterisk. At this time, the news that Yu and Yu Fangyan were detained by the Jinyi Wei Yamen pending trial had also spread to the Qingyuan uncle's mansion. Everyone just thought it was Yu who went out to play, thinking that she would be back later. Where did you expect to be arrested after not seeing anyone for a long time? For a while, the whole house was not peaceful, and Mrs. Bo almost closed her eyes and fainted after hearing this, but the eldest lady Yu Shuang was more stable, and only asked the person who came to pass the message, what did my sister do, how could she be arrested? The next person said, I heard that it was in the tea house to start with the third lady, and the second girl in Zhang Shilang's house was next to her, and went to report the case. Unexpectedly, as soon as Jin Yiwei came, he arrested both of them, saying that they were in the tea house for a while and couldn't ask clearly, so it was better to go back to the Yamen to explain. These words were preached by men. At that time, it was actually Yu Fangyan's hand, but as soon as everyone heard that the two people had been arrested, they naturally thought that it was the hands of these two people interacting, and the words naturally changed. Mrs. Bo immediately scolded, Yu Fangyan's little hoof, it's always a bad thing to get on her. Yu Shuang was a little keenly aware of the existence of second girl Zhang. But she was not selected to study in the palace. She had only heard of the grievances between her sister and Zhang Xuning, but she didn't know the details clearly, although she suspected that this matter was related to Zhang Xuning, but it was not easy to make a conclusion at the moment. Only said, my sister has been selected to be in the palace as a companion, and the opportunity is rare. This time when I went back to the house, I just went out of the palace to rest, and I didn't dare to make a big fuss. No matter whether my sister was innocent or not, it was always bad to pass it on to the palace. If one is not careful, he will take advantage of the loophole for someone who cares, but I am afraid that the position of this companion will not be guaranteed. And I will return to the palace in another day, and if my sister is still in prison, it will be even more difficult. I can't handle this matter well, and when I deal with the public, I have to ask my father to come forward. Mrs. Bo immediately said, yes, yes, we are also a noble family. These people in brocade clothes say that they will take people and take people, how can they ever put us in their eyes? I will go to see the uncle and ask the uncle to deal with it. The group hurried to Yuking Yuanbo. But who would have expected that after Uncle Qing Yuan asked about the specific situation, his face changed greatly, and he suddenly got up and asked, it was Zhou Qinhu who had just been promoted by Jin Yue who took Yuer. The crowd didn't know why. Uncle Qing Yuan was already furious, confused. Confused. What are you doing to provoke Jin Yue? The original Zhou Qinhu can still deal with our house, and now the new one is also called Zhou Qinhu, but I have asked someone to visit me several times and has never answered me anything. Jin Yue and this gang are all evil ghosts who eat people and don't spit out bones. What do you want me to use to satisfy their appetite right now? Mrs. Bo was already crying, but if you don't save you, uncle, what will we do with you? I heard that the people who are being detained and awaiting trial are staying in prison like those prisoners. God knows what kind of pitiful situation it is. Uncle King Yuan's face was gloomy, and he also thought about it. Recently, there have been rumors in the palace that he wants to choose a concubine for the king of Linzi. Yuer finally relied on the first calligraphy and painting at the double ninth banquet that day, and was selected to be a companion in the palace, but it was a rare opportunity. If she could find a good family in the future, Yu Bafa would be of great help. But you're going to be in prison. Miss Qinjin was not born to the third daughter's cheap concubine, she can't give up casually. If the matter spreads, who wants to marry her in the future? It was a real sudden disaster. Although Bafu is also handed down from a family, but no one has held real power for 3 generations, and the current court has long been on the edge, leaving only an empty shelf to look good, but I don't know how much it will cost to settle this matter. The more Uncle Qing Yuan thought about it, the angrier he became. But there was nothing to be done about the matter here, so I could only grit my teeth and instruct the housekeeper, go, first order some money in the inner treasury, and prepare the carriage immediately. I will go to the yamen first. Asterisk. When Zhang Xuning returned to Jiang's mansion, the sun was already setting. When she entered the door, a mother-in-law said to her, it's rare for you to come back from the palace. The old lady said that you will have dinner in the main house at night, and the old slave is worried that you will come back late and miss the hour, but now it looks just right. When Zhang Xuning heard this, she paused and said, got it? No matter how they get along inside, they are still a family. It's right to come back for a meal. She went back to her room to tidy up a bit, and then went to the main house. At this time, lights were lit everywhere on the porch. In the room, Zhang Boyu and Meng Shi had been sitting for a while. Zhang Suiwai sat beside Meng Shi. There was a gilded invitation on the table, and Zhang Boyu was looking down, frowning. Zhang Xuning came in and saluted. Zhang Boyu called her up, but looked at her but stopped talking. Zhang Xuning noticed it, and when he raised his eyes and saw the invitation in his hand, the strong and powerful handwriting on the outer cover was a little familiar. It was Yan Lin's handwriting. Zhang Boyu felt that she should also take a look, so he handed over the invitation and said, the invitation from the Yanji Marquis Mansion invites people to the crown ceremony of the Prince of the World. When Zhang Xuning opened the invitation, her fingers trembled slightly. Just because every word on this invitation was handwritten by Yan Lin himself, although there was not a word mentioning her, it seemed to be just some ordinary words on the invitation, but she also wanted to know that since the Yanji Marquis Mansion sent an invitation to the outside world, it was impossible to have only this one, and it was impossible for every invitation to be written by Yan Lin himself. Her invitation is special. Has already cleared up his relationship with her in public, but this young man still hopes that he can be by his side and witness the moment when he is crowned an adult. Zhang Xuning slowly closed the invitation. Zhang Boyu asked, will you go then? Jiang Xuning said, "Go." Meng Shi listened to the conversation between his father and daughter, and his eyes couldn't help but be a little worried, and he wanted to say that something had happened to the Marquis of Yanji's mansion, and he didn't know what was going on, but he was afraid that most of the high gates in Beijing would not be able to avoid it. Where could they catch up like this? It's just that Zhang Boyu also nodded, so it's not good to say more. She said, "Sit down and eat first." The cooks in the house cook generally. Jiang Xuning is still a little picky in the word eat, because her appetite has always been average, and she eats less. Jiang Suiwai sat next to her and didn't speak. After a meal, the family finished eating in a muffled voice, and it was inevitable that they felt a little heavy. When a few cups of tea were brought after the meal, Meng Shi said, "The master always makes the decision in the house, and some things are not easy to talk about. It's just that everyone knows that the Yanji Marquis mansion has been abandoned by the saints, and our sister Ning has been taken care of by the little Marquis a lot in the past, although the in-laws are not successful, but the crown ceremony is indeed going to go. The concubine does not object to this. But Sister Hui and the Ho mansion have never had any dealings. When I was drinking tea with the Duchess of Dingguo and others a few days ago, I heard that His Royal Highness the King of Linzi will start to choose a concubine soon. I think on the day of the crown ceremony, Sister Ning will go, and Sister Hui will forget it." In the end, Jiang Xuning entered the palace to accompany the study, and also earn face for the family. Although she felt that she was fighting with the young lady of Qingyu and Bafu in the palace, it was inevitable that they would be embarrassed to meet adults outside, but Meng didn't say much about her. She just wanted to be able to pick out Sister Hui and leave more possibilities for future family affairs. Although Zhang Boyu has a close relationship with the Yanji Ho mansion, he is in a big trouble, and his arms can't twist his thighs, so he naturally has to consider the situation in the mansion, so he can't refute Meng's words. Jiang Xuning didn't speak either. Zhang Boyu said, "That's fine." But no one expected that at this time, Jiang Suiwai, who had not said a word beside her before, actually raised her head and said, "I'm going too." Meng Shi's eyes widened. "Sister Hui." Jiang Suiwai glanced at Jiang Xuning, and had no intention of changing her mind. "My father is the head of the family, and he has already gone to the crown ceremony, but it doesn't matter how my children choose. And now the affairs of the Marquis of Yanji may not be without room for turnaround. My father and sister have gone, and my mother and I should go." Meng Shi was stunned for a moment. Even Zhang Boyu didn't expect it. Jiang Xuning looked at her fixedly, seeing that her complexion was beautiful and her expression was calm. Thinking about what was in her mouth, she was reasonable. Such a beautiful lady, what is worse than Xiaoshu? So he smiled slowly. Meng Shi thought for a moment, why is this not the truth? Zhang Boyu sighed, Sister Hui is really sensible and reasonable. After using tea, Jiang Xuning and Jiang Suiwai retreated from the room together, walked on the veranda, stopped their footsteps, and said, "If I were you, I would not miss such a great opportunity. After all, the whole capital knows that His Royal Highness the King of Linzi is good friends with Yan Lin, and Yan Lin will definitely go." Jiang Suiwai's face changed, as if she didn't expect her to say this, and the whole person couldn't help but tense. Jiang Xuning is ordinary. She lowered her eyes and saw the embroidered handkerchief she was holding in her hand at the moment, so she gently reached out and pulled it out from her fingers, spread it out and put it in her palm, revealing a light green orchid embroidered on her face, and a small red ginger flower on the corner. So she raised her eyebrows slightly, looked at Jiang Suiwai and said, "I hope it will be some. You had better take this embroidered handkerchief into the palace." The embroidered handkerchief was put back into Jiang Suiwai's hands by Jiang Xuning. Jiang Suiwai looked at her, as if she didn't understand what she was saying. Jiang Xuning has never been close to her, she plans her own, and she doesn't want her to understand, let alone explain anything. She still thinks about going to see Yu Fangyan in her heart, and after returning the embroidered handkerchief to her, she turned around and went out of the house. It's a night out to go. But no one in the mansion dared to say anything, as if they were used to it. Zhang Suiwei stood in place and looked at her back, not caring about the opinions of others. All the rules in this world that were added to the women in the house seemed to be trampled under her feet, and she was a little envious for a while. But in an instant, they were all put away. Zhang Xuning has never experienced the days she has lived, so naturally she does not have such a temperament. In the final analysis, everyone has their own destiny. Asterisk. It was very late. Zhou Yunzi was still in the yamen and did not go back. His subordinates asked him, "Aren't you going back yet?" Zhou Yunzi replied, "If there is something, you should go first." Those brocade guards didn't dare to ask more, and in groups of 3, they removed the official robes on their bodies, hooked their shoulders and went out to drink, leaving Zhou Yin alone. Zhang Xuning is here at the right time. Wearing a black cloak on the outside, wearing a big hood, and wearing a goose yellow long skirt inside, but it is more and more slender, and when he puts the hood down when he arrives at the yamen, a white face is exposed, and his eyebrows are like pictures. Zhou Yunzi glanced at it, lowered his gaze again, and said, "In the afternoon, Qingyu and Bafa came to fish for people, but Zhou remembered that the second girl said that she would rest for 2 days, but she was not in a hurry for the time being, and it was not too late to release people tomorrow." Not long after he was promoted to 1,000 households, he still felt the power in his hands for the first time, and it turned out to be so easy to use. In the afternoon, Uncle Qingyuan came in person, but he didn't dare to speak when he saw him. A box of silver tickets was handed over, 3,000 taels. Zhou Yunzi glanced at him, only frowned, and said, "Uncle doesn't have to be like this. The yamen can release the person after the trial, at most 7 days and 8 days, if Ling Ai has nothing to do with picking quarrels and harassment, it will naturally be fine." King Yuanbo's eyelids jumped. He took out a silver ticket worth 5,000 taels from his left sleeve and put it on. Zhou Yunzi's brows furrowed even deeper. "It's all a matter of juniors, and Jin Yue also takes the inch, so that it won't have anything to do with the matter of the heavenly sect and the party. Uncle, please go back." Uncle Qingyuan almost didn't kneel when he heard it. This time, he gritted his teeth, as if the pain was so painful that the flesh on his body fell off, and he took out a silver ticket of 5,000 taels from his right sleeve and put it on. When he spoke, he almost cried, and said, "My daughter has not suffered anything since she was born, and her family is also pampered and loved, although she always makes a little stupid, but it can't hinder anyone's business." It was not easy for her to choose to enter the palace as a companion, and she was going back to the palace in a day, and asked the thousands of households to raise their noble hands and be accommodating. Zhou Yunzi then said, "Uncle loves his daughter very much, and it is pitiful to listen to it. Even so, I ordered someone to interrogate him overnight, and you will come tomorrow." Uncle Qingyuan went with 1,000 thanks. The 13,000 taels were naturally left. As for whether he insulted him after leaving, it is unknown. At this moment, Zhou Yunzi took out an envelope from his sleeve, handed it to Zhang Xuning, and said, "Bafa will send someone to pick up Nau tomorrow," but he didn't mention another lady in the mansion. "I told Uncle Qingyuan that this matter still has to be left to someone to await trial, and Yu Fengyan is the one who caused trouble, so he can't be released for the time being." Uncle said that it was nature. And then gone. Zhang Xuning took the envelope. I opened it and took a look, 2 silver tickets worth 5,000 taels. She stuffed the silver ticket back again, and there were indeed 3 points of nails in the dark passage. Although it is not much, it is definitely a lot, and she knows in her heart what kind of person Zhou Yunzi is, but she is afraid that Uncle Qingyuan will give more at that time, and she will have this 10,000 yuan in her hand. I don't know what this uncle's expression was at that time, so that you knew how much he should hate? Zhang Xunning's heart snorted. It's just that this money is used to do the artesian well salt farm, and if you go back and make up for it, it shouldn't be much worse. She said, it costs a lot to get a UU, so that Bafa will not spend the second on just money. One is a concubine, the other is a concubine, one is a concubine, one is in the palace to study, a father does not love his mother, and no one cares if he dies in prison, and people think that you still have to keep a handle in their hands to feel at ease, so they deliberately left Euphangien to you, so that you can rest assured that you can receive this money. It's all a common means in officialdom. Zhou Yinzi listened and nodded. Zhang Xuning asked again, how is Fang Yin? Zhou Yinzi took her to the prison cell of the back office. When the jailer saw that the lord of the 1,000 households had brought a woman, all wrapped in a cloak, and although he could not see her appearance clearly, he did not dare to ask anything, so he was instructed to open the door without saying a word, and lead them in. Jin Yiwei mostly arrested people for the emperor, and the people involved in the case were either princes or nobles, and often had to use some means to make these people tell the truth, because there were all kinds of hideous torture instruments everywhere in this prison. Zhang Xuning had never been to such a place in her previous life or in her life, and when she swept it away, she felt shocked. However, the next moment was irrepressibly thinking of Zhang Shat. In the previous life, that person was in prison, and it was his enemy who interrogated him, and all kinds of suffering should be added to his body. How painful should it be? The prison was windowless on all sides, dark and damp, and bitterly cold in winter. Some of the cells were locked up, most of them already asleep. There are also some who have their eyes open, but they don't react when they look at people in the past, like walking corpses, and there is a palpitating numbness in their eyes. It's just that the further you go, the fewer cells you have with people. Most of them were empty. When she reached the innermost room, Zhang Xuning even saw a few bright candles falling on the ground outside the cell door. Further inside, I saw that although it was still a cell, it was cleanly cleaned, the bed resting in the corner was neat and tidy, and there was a thick bedding, and a bookcase was placed against the wall, with pen, ink, paper, and inkstone, and a bright lamp and candle were placed on the desk. There was a person who bowed his head and looked carefully at the scroll in front of him. His hair was loosened and simply tied into a bunch, hanging down from the front of his shoulders to his chest, but his eyebrows were clear, and his posture was gentle and supple. It was Euphangien. Zhang Xuning was stunned for a moment, standing outside the cell, looking inside, not knowing what to do for a while. Zhou Yinzi walked behind her and didn't speak. It was silent here, there was footsteps when they came from outside. Euphangien easily heard it, turned his head to look, and saw Zhang Xuning standing outside. He was suddenly very surprised, and quickly got up, and directly opened the closed prison door, and said, "Why is the second girl here?" Zhang Xuning. She glanced at Zhou Yin faintly. I have to say that although this person has the heart of a tiger and wolf, there is a reason why she likes to use this person and prefers to value this person in her last life. It's so beautiful. The cell door was unlocked, just closed like an ordinary person's door. When Zhou Yinzi saw this meeting, he retreated into the distance first. Zhang Xuning walked in, looked at it, and finally felt that this place was too narrow, looked at Yufang and said, "I suddenly wanted to do this, and I will be tired of you being imprisoned this time." Euphangien has never been so happy. She looked left and right at her cell but was very comfortable. Listening to Zhang Xuning's words, she quickly shook her head, and said, "No, no, no. Lord Zhou arranged me very well, and I knew that the second girl didn't want me to go back to the house to be punished, so I blamed me for being too impulsive. I'm staying here, I'm happy, I'm happy." Zhang Xuning was stunned. Happy? Euphangien nodded vigorously, unable to hide the joy on her face, so she wanted to tell her that this place was much better than the firewood house, and there were lamps and candles to shine, and there was an account book to learn, but when the words were about to be spoken, She looked at her, but she felt that she couldn't let her know about it. So she opened her mouth and closed it again. The head also hung down, and there was no joy before it came, and it became the most common timid appearance. When Jiang Xuning saw her like this, she didn't know and guessed 7 or 8 points. Looking at her thin and haggard description again, how can you not know that during the time she was in the palace, Yu Fangyin lived a very difficult life in the mansion? My heart was very sour for a while. She forced a smile, and Liu Fang sat down on the clean bed. Her eyes were a little hot, and she only said, "I know that you are being bullied by them in the mansion, but it is difficult for me to interfere in the affairs of the uncle's mansion, so I have to come up with this method as a last resort. Fortunately, there are thousands of adults here who can take care of you, and you can't take care of anything else, so you can live a life like a human being in a place where this is not a place for people. In 2 days, I will ask Lord Zhou to be more lenient and let you out secretly. I'm going to enter the palace in a day, so what about the artesian well salt farm, and the matter of Renwiazi? It all depends on you. If you are happy in a place like this, I will be happy, but if you are not happy, you must not give up on yourself. I have to rely on Fangyin to solve everything." She said it with a smile, but the sourness in her voice made Yu Fangyin's heart sour, and she hurriedly assured her, "Second girl, don't worry, although Fangyin is stupid, she can already look at the account book these days. This time, I saw that Ren Gongzi, and I had already talked about it. After the second sister in the family knew about it, she also wanted to do it. Fangyin remembers what you said. Since you can get out of this cell, you can also go out to talk about business, and there is no better place in the world. I'm happy anyway." She said it scrambled. At the end, I wanted to say something to comfort Jiang Xuning, but my mouth was stupid, and I didn't know how to phrase it. There are people in the world who feel that living in prison is more comfortable than at home. Jiang Xuning listened, and put her heart down at first, but after thinking about it, she felt very pitiful in addition to being funny. I didn't dare to say more on this topic at the moment, but I was afraid that I couldn't help but ask what kind of life she was living in the house. So he took out the envelope that Zhou Yanzi gave him from his sleeve, handed it to Yu Fangyin's hand, and said, "The skinny camel is bigger than the horse, and the salt field of the Ren family in the artesian well, no matter how dilapidated it is far beyond what ordinary people think." Yu Fangyin opened it and looked at it, but she was frightened. She had never seen so much money in her life. Jiang Xuning knew that the money came from Qingyu and Bafu, and it should be in Yu Fangyin's hands, so he should make up for it. "It's just that it's not good to tell her." Thinking of the current predicament, he said, "Uncle Qingyuan doesn't treat people as people, and there is such a harsh sister as you. I shouldn't have wronged you to continue to stay at home. But I can't think of a way to get you out for a while." Yu Fangyin hurriedly comforted her, "It's okay, Fangyin is really fine, it's okay to live here for the rest of her life." Jiang Xuning didn't laugh. She looked at her, and for the first time felt that this girl was too painful. Originally, the best and most justifiable way to leave Bafu was to find a safe person to marry, so that no one could say anything. But I want to make sure that you can only make this decision, so that you have been imprisoned once, but it is difficult to find a marriage in the future. The best way to leave Bafu is to get married." Yu Fangyin blinked. His eyes drooped, but he looked at the envelope containing 10,000 taels of silver tickets in his hand and thought about it. Chapter 78, Deep Palace's Heart. "It was really that little slut who made a move on me, even the bench was copied, and I didn't even dare to do it to her. She's always been bullied by you, how dare she hit you?" "Really, Daddy, I didn't lie, you listen to me explain. It's just that you've been in the mansion since you came to dominate, and you're going to beat her when you go out, and when you spread the word, what will people say about the uncle's mansion? You even asked someone to hold the handle, and recruited the people of the Jinyi Guard, and arrested all of you. Do you know how much money the mansion spent to get you out? What? 13,000 taels, a full 13,000 taels, all gone. Because others said that she was arrested and interrogated by Jinyue's people because she was doing it with Yu Fangyan, everyone in the Bafu thought that she was still doing it to Yu Fangyan when she was out of the house, so she suffered from this difficulty. Even Uncle Qingyuan thought so. After all, who can believe that a person of such a bad race as Yu Fangyan, a low-level maid in the mansion, can bully her on weekdays? How can she take the initiative to pick up the bench to deal with Miss Yu, who almost choked her life? It's just a lie, and I don't know how to pick a credible statement. Yu withstood Uncle Qingyuan's anger. He really had nowhere to excuse. After being locked up in the prison all night, cold and hungry, the jailer was very fierce, giving her rancid cold food, not even lighting a lamp at night, and in the darkness she could hear the sound of rats crawling over and screaming, and she screamed in fright. After a whole night, I didn't dare to close my eyes. By the time the second morning someone came from Bafu to take her back, her eyes were already swollen with tears, and the undersides of her eyes were even more bloodshot, her dress was dirty, and her hair was messy, and she threw herself into Mrs. Bo's arms and wept silently. Yu originally thought that after returning home, this nightmare would be over. Unexpectedly, that was just the beginning. As soon as she returned home, she was scolded by her father, ordered her to kneel on the ground, and asked her how she broke into such a big disaster, and said that if she hadn't bullied and beaten Yu Fangyan, she would never have attracted Jinyue. God knows the truth, Yu Fangyan took the lead in picking up the bench and wanted to beat her. At that time, she didn't even have the courage to fight back. But who told her to bully Yu Fangyan on weekdays, and used the truth to justify herself? From her parents to the maid, no one believed her, but they all frowned and thought that she was looking for excuses for herself and shirking responsibility. Moreover, 13,000 taels. That's a lot of money. Yu's eyes widened. Father, are you crazy? How can you give them 13,000 taels? The newcomer Jokin, who in the Jinyi Guard, is in cahoots with Zhang Xuning. This money is in his hands as if it is in Zhang Xuning's hands. I know, I know. As she said this, her face suddenly distorted. This is a bureau, a trap. Daddy, believe me, it was Zhang Xuning's little slut who deliberately instigated Yu Fangyan to beat me, and deliberately reported to the official, calling the person surnamed Zhou to come, so as to cheat our uncle's money. Since they dare to do such a thing, and force Daddy to take the money, we might as well sue the palace. We will definitely be able to make them go around without food. As long as Uncle Qingyuan thinks of the 13,000 taels, his whole heart is dripping blood, although he has saved Yu, but now the Bafu is already stretched, and the more than 10,000 taels of silver are as painful as cramping his tendons and picking his skin. Seeing the return of his beloved daughter, instead of half of his joy, he became even more angry. Hearing that she was still talking nonsense now, Uncle Qingyuan finally couldn't bear it anymore. Smack! The slap under the rage finally fell out and hit Yu's face. Was talking about calling someone to report to the official and accused Zhou Yanzi of accepting bribes. Yu, whose face was crooked, and there was a buzzing sound in her head, and she didn't stabilize her body, and fell directly to the side. Father! Uncle, what are you doing? For a while, there were people who went to help Yu, and there were people who went to pull Uncle Qingyuan, and the hall was completely chaotic. Yu couldn't believe that her father, who had always doted on her, would beat her, and because she was wrongfully imprisoned, she was stupid, and tears fell from her eyes. She pushed away all the people who were helping her. Standing up, he rushed out of the hall and ran all the way back to his room. At the moment, I took the key, rummaged through the cabinets, and found out everything valuable. When the maids and ladies saw her terrible face, they didn't dare to step forward to stop her. but I don't know what she's going to do at this moment. Mrs. Bo was busy staying in the hall to persuade the uncle to dissipate her anger, only the eldest lady Yu Shuang was worried about her, so she hurriedly ran back to see her, and saw that she had turned out her savings, and was startled. "What are you doing here? Father is just angry for a while. You bully Yu Fangyin on weekdays, and put people in the firewood room for 10 days, and this time you are still beating her outside, so you can make this incident. Do you want to run away from home and threaten anyone now? Even you believe they don't believe me." Yu has always felt that this sister is the same as herself, only the two of them are concubines in the Bafu, and Yu Fangyin's cheap concubine is not even worthy of lifting shoes for them. On weekdays, when she was too much to Yu Fang, I didn't see her come out to speak. Now I'm pretending to be a good person. She sneered. "Okay, good, if you don't believe it, you don't believe it. Then Zhang Xuning is a demon who eats people and doesn't spit out bones. Everyone is in the capital, sooner or later they will bump into each other. I'll see what happens to you at that time." Yu Shuang felt that she was irrational after being locked up in prison for a day, and she was stunned when she heard this. Yu had already turned out her private money to count. There was a little terrible paranoia on her face, and she only said, "As for running away from home, don't worry, I'm not so stupid. Isn't it because of the more than 10,000 taels of silver that he spoke so harshly to me? I will show you what more than 10,000 taels of silver is. What are you counting money for?" Yu Shuang was inexplicably a little scared. Yu looked at her and smiled. "Don't do anything." What I thought in my heart was that Yu Fangyin's little slut was also locked up in prison now, suffering hardships, and he was several times worse than himself. And one day she will have to go home. At that time, she will come back with tenfold and hundredfold revenge. After speaking, he turned his head and directly called the subordinate who had gone to the Shuxiang Inn to inquire about the situation to come in, and asked, "How is Ren Weizi doing over there?" The next person has been secretly inquiring about the situation these days, and there happened to be an urgent news early this morning. As soon as he heard Yu ask, he hurriedly said outside, "Yesterday, there was a well-known boss Lu in the secluded pavilion in the capital who went to the inn to visit Ren Gongzi, and I went again this morning, and there was a rumor that boss Lu had paid some shares, but I don't know if it's true or not." Yu was overjoyed when she heard this. With such a big businessman going down, things are reliable. But then I was anxious. If this matter is preempted by others, it will not be cheap. At that moment, she only said "I know," hugged the silver ticket in the box, turned her head and walked out the door. Yu Shuang's eyelids jumped, and she grabbed her and asked, "Why are you going?" Yu shook her off very impatiently. "Don't worry about it. Asterisk. 2 days off, in the blink of an eye. It's time for the companions to return to the palace again." People came one after another in Yangzizai, and gradually it began to be lively. Zhang Xuning talked for a while in Yu Fangyin's cell that night before leaving, but when she went back, she didn't know why she was haunted by nightmares, and she barely closed her eyes all night, and she was only busy counting the things that Yan Lin had given herself before during the day, and they were all packed in boxes one by one to be handed over to Zhang Boyo to deal with, and when she returned to the palace the next day, she was still a little unrelieved. But she just looked a little sleepy. There are more people than her in the companion reading. After the previous investigation of the words against the party, all the palace maids in Yangzizai have changed, and they all look like fresh faces. They all stood far away with their heads bowed. In the Liashui pavilion, Chen Chuyi was making tea, Xiao Shu was drinking tea, Zhou Baoying was eating refreshments, and Yao Rongrong was carefully sitting beside her, looking at everyone and not daring to speak. Yao Shi and Yu sat opposite each other. The eyes of these two people were a little red, but Yao Shi buried his head, lowered his eyes, and kept a calm face, looking at the cup in front of him, faintly revealing a bit of gloom, but he didn't speak. Yu's eyes were swollen and still didn't disappear. Even if he rolled over with a hard-boiled egg, he looked like he had just been beaten, and a pair of eyes were raised, and he stared at Jiang Xuning, who had just walked in from the outside. This atmosphere, even a fool knows that it is wrong. Jiang Xuning didn't notice Yao Shi when she first came in, because Yu looked too miserable and conspicuous at this moment, so people couldn't help but notice her at a glance. She thought that Yu would be miserable, but she didn't expect it to be so miserable. Looking at the eyes that hated to eat her, he should have even known about the 10,000 taels, right? It's just that Jiang Xuning is not weak at all. She paced in with a slight smile on the corner of her lips, only looked back at Yu directly without any ambiguity, and said jokingly, "Looking at Miss Yu like this, why is it like going home and suffering a disaster? Even the fat powder can't cover the traces on her face. What happened to you?" Yu really hated her. But after the tea house, she fully understood, whether in the palace or outside the palace, she couldn't fight this woman. At least not for now. This woman is a femme fatale and extremely vicious. She hated and feared Jiang Xuning, and she also knew that she had no advantage in this Yangtze fast, so in the face of her obvious provocation and ridicule, she could only bite the blood and swallow it in her stomach, and did not dare to reply to her mouth. The people present were all clear-eyed people, and from this simple round, they guessed that in the short 2 days outside the palace, Yu was afraid that she had planted a big heel in front of Jiang Xuning, so that although she hated it at the moment, she was so afraid that she didn't even dare to choke. Jiang Xuning saw that she knew that she was cowardly, and she felt relieved. It's just that when he sat down and raised his head for a long time, he inadvertently met Yao Shi's cold gaze, but when he saw her raise his head, the cold was put away. Yao Shi actually pulled the corners of her lips and smiled at her. Jiang Xuning suddenly thought of the palace late that night. Jiang Sha said to himself that he wanted to withdraw from his family, and then thought about Yao Shi's smile at the moment, only to feel a sudden chill behind him. Yao Shi is narrow-minded and not very pure-minded. Should she think that she was suing her behind her back to ruin her family's affairs, right? But Yao Shi didn't say a word. Jiang Xuning was even more difficult to ask. The details of this short eye contact, as if nothing had happened, did not stir up half a wave. Most of the 8 of them arrived at night. When she left last time, Shen Zai, the eldest princess of Liang, was still grounded by the Queen Mother. When they returned to the palace this time, Shen Zai's grounding had been lifted, and they had been reading together for a while, so they were familiar with Shen Zai. Shen Zai was indeed very bored. Because of her plea for the Yanji Marquis mansion, she quarreled with her mother without saying a word. Said that she was grounded for reflection, but she didn't know what she was doing wrong. Although the ban was lifted today, he was also angry and unwilling to go to Sinning Palace to ask for peace. The companions came just in time. Mingfeng Palace is her dormitory, and there are all kinds of fun objects, so she pulled everyone to play together, playing shadow puppets for a while, going down to Shuanglu for a while, and playing hide and seek a few times, until it was very late when Mama Su came to remind her, and then stopped. Jiang Xuning didn't sleep well last night, and she basically didn't close her eyes all day, so she was a little absent-minded when she played, and her head was little by little when she watched them get off Shuanglu, and she almost dozed off. Shen Zai saw the scene in her eyes. She didn't care what others thought. She told everyone else to disperse first, but she went to take Jiang Xuning's hand, puffed out her cheeks and said, "Ning Ning, are you sleepy? Yang's his eye is far away from my dormitory, you can sleep with me tonight. Just sleep here?" Jiang Xuning was really shocked when she heard the word sleep, and she woke up scared when she was drowsy at the time. She opened her mouth to refuse. But the happy expression when Shen Zai was playing with others before was gone. Her eyes lowered, and she smiled, but she looked a little depressed and melancholy, and said in a low voice, "I want to talk to someone." At this time, Jiang Xuning realized that she seemed to eat soft rather than hard. She knew why Shenzai was grounded, and she also knew that she had been good with Yanlin since she was a child. Thinking about it at the moment, she was the eldest princess, but she could only watch her imperial brother order a heavy army to surround the Yanji Marquis mansion and could not do anything. I can't say the words that came to my lips. Jiang Xuning finally said, "Okay." The eldest princess's bedroom is as luxurious as it is, with golden hooks and incense tents and high beds and soft pillows. Shenzai finally dragged Jiang Xuning to the bed. She changed Jiang Xuning into her own bedclothes, drove out all the palace maids and grandmothers who were waiting in the palace, and came to her with a brocade pillow with her bare feet, and lay flat on the bed like her. There was silence in the deep palace. The lights in the hall were all extinguished, and only the Korean paper pasted on the window still reflected a little light outside. Jiang Xuning was suddenly in a trance. Shenzai was beside her, looked at the top of the tent, blinked, and said, "Ning Ning, why do you say that the adults think differently from us? Yanlin is so good, and the home mansion is so good. When I was a child, I also went to their house, and the cherry tree grew tall, and the cherries on the top were all red, and I heard that Yanlin's aunt planted them back then. I was very greedy and naughty, and I always wanted to pick cherries from that tree and eat them. Yanlin always said that it was not ripe, and he didn't want me to go up. Once, I lied to him and told him that my uncle told him to practice martial arts, and I secretly climbed a tree and picked the cherry to eat, which really hurt my teeth." Jiang Xuning's tears crossed the corners of her eyes. Shenzai clasped both hands in front of her, and she especially wanted to cry. Later, Yanlin came back to look for me, but I didn't find it. I hid in a tree to scare him, but I accidentally fell off the tree and fell to the ground, crying in pain. Yanlin was frightened, and he didn't dare to move me when he reacted, and after calling someone to come, he reprimanded me with a cold face, saying that I deserved it. When my aunt saw that he was so fierce, she asked the monk to beat him up to relieve my anger. I have forgotten how old I was at that time, and I have forgotten what happened later, but I remember the tree, so tall and so tall, the sun so big and so big, and the cherry, I remember that it was sour, but when I think about it, it was so sweet and sweet. As she spoke, she began to cry. I haven't cried once in the past few days, but maybe I think Ning Ning is different from others, and the first time I see her, I can say it to her heart, so I feel that such words can be said to her. She and Xiao Shu are certainly good, but this kind of good is separated by a layer. Sometimes she even feels uncomfortable. Obviously, she is the most noble eldest princess in this palace, but others look at Xiao Shu, and the Queen Mother treats Xiao Shu as if she is no worse than herself, and she always feels that Ning Ning and Ah Shu are also different. Shenzai had never felt so sad. She couldn't help but hug Jiang Xuning, buried her head on her, and all her tears fell, but she didn't dare to let the palace people outside the hall hear it, so she suppressed the voice and sobbed. Jiang Xuning felt a wet piece in her neck. I only heard her faint voice, "I'm so afraid, in the future, Yanlin will be gone, the companion will be gone, everyone will be gone, you will be gone, and I will be the only one left." Jiang Xuning choked in her throat. She had to try her best to keep her eyes open and restrain herself so that her emotions would not collapse in such a night and in such a deep palace. Even if you are a princess, there are such sad and frightened moments. People live in the world, who can be exempt from vulgarity. Shenzai cried for a long time, and when she was tired of crying, she gradually became sleepy, and lay down next to her and slowly fell asleep. Jiang Xuning tucked the quilt corner for her. Turning sideways to stare at the princess who should have been loved by thousands of people, remembering the sad and even melancholy fate of her previous life, after a long time, he gently leaned over and kissed her forehead, and then retreated, stepped barefoot on the cold ground of the dormitory, walked to a carved window, gently opened a slit, and looked out. A palace lamp hangs high. The red wall cornices, overlapping and overlapping. Compared with the simple Yangtze, Mingfeng Palace is really too similar to Cunning Palace. Jiang Xuning can't sleep, and he doesn't dare to fall asleep. Chapter 79, Palace Dress. Jiang Xuning basically didn't sleep all night, and only when the morning was about to dawn did she think that she would go to Fengchen Hall to attend classes, so she forced herself to forget the discomfort brought by this palace and took a nap. But it didn't take an hour. The more royal it is, the stricter the rules, and this kind of thing is lazy. Jiang Xuning can have it in the mansion, but Shen Zai is difficult to have in the palace. After many years of court life, when it was time to get up, she didn't need to be called by the palace maid. She herself opened her eyes, got up and was served by the palace people to wash and dress. Obviously she had long been accustomed to it. She cried and vented about last night, and when she woke up this morning, except for some swollen eyes, she regained her former vitality. Not only did she wash herself, but she also commanded the palace people to serve Jiang Xuning. Jiang Xuning didn't sleep well the night before yesterday, and she was even more tired after a toss last night, but seeing that Shen Zai rarely regained her laughter, it was not easy to show it for her to see the clues, which ruined her rare good mood. It was to forcibly ignore the sudden tightness from the temples on both sides. With a smile on his lips, while talking to Shen Zai, he accepted the service of the palace people. The palace people in Yangtze do not serve daily life. But Jiang Xuning was a queen in her last life, and she was not uncomfortable being served by the palace people. It was only when she handed the jimpsa back to the hands of the palace people very naturally, and subconsciously waved her hand to tell them to retreat, that a chill rushed up from under her feet, making her shudder. Shen Zai hadn't noticed anything unusual yet. The female official serving in the dormitory glanced at Jiang Xuning, but asked her with some embarrassment, "Your Highness, you left Zhang Binjiao to stay in the palace on a whim last night, but the palace people haven't gone to Yangtze to get the dress that Zhang Binjiao often wears. I don't know now what to wear." Shen Zai also looked back. At this moment, Jiang Xuning was standing there wearing only a snow-white middle coat, with a beautiful face facing the sky, about having just woken up, quite a bit sickly, like those sick beauties in the paintings. "It's so beautiful." Her eyes couldn't help but light up, and she immediately said to the female official, "Ning Ning is about the same size as me, and it is naturally the best to wear mine." Jiang Xuning? She was still thinking about the pampered habit she had developed in Cunning Palace, and she didn't pay attention to what they were talking about at all, and before she could react, she was already pulled by Shen Zai to sit in front of the makeup mirror. Next, listen to Shen Zai greet left and right. After a while, she called this palace maid to come and powder a thrush for her, and for a while, she called the palace maid to take a palace dress again, and personally opened her makeup, what ruby earrings, cloisonné bracelets, all to Jiang Xuning. Jiang Xuning couldn't cry or laugh for a while, but she felt that Shen Zai was like a little girl who suddenly got a doll, and she had to dress her up beautifully before she would stop. She was a little sleepy, so she didn't have the energy to stop her. He simply stood up and sat down for a while, and let her fiddle. Shen Zai changed another pair of earrings and gestured on her earlobes, only to feel that this purple glass as light as smoke can only be supported by her slender neck and snow-white complexion, which is so beautiful that people are reluctant to look away. Just looking at it, her previously soaring eyebrows drooped. Jiang Xuning caught a glimpse of it and asked her, "Isn't it good looking?" Shen Zai put down her hand, looking at her without taking her eyes off, but there was a little bit of distress. "It's good looking, but it's too good looking. I can't help but think, you have such a non-fighting temperament, you will be calculated in the palace. If Yan Lin is gone in the future, who should protect you?" Jiang Xuning was speechless. Shen Zai thought about it surprisingly seriously, her eyes rolled around, and then she lit up, and asked her, "What do you think of my brother Wang?" Shenju. Jiang Xuaning's eyelids jumped, and she immediately remembered the trajectory of her fate in her previous life, and immediately said without thinking about it, "Thank you, Your Highness, Your Royal Highness, King Linzi, is elegant and dignified, Xuaning's cold body just wants to live a peaceful life, you can't joke." Shenzai was puzzled, "What's wrong with my brother Wang?" Jiang Xuaning said in her heart, "Your brother Wang is good anywhere, but it is not suitable for me." Shenzai was very excited when she thought of this stubble. The palace was full of her people, and she was not afraid of being listened to by others, so she squatted directly in front of her and said, "Really, Ning Ning, I heard that the Queen Mother and the Imperial Brother said that they will choose a concubine for my royal brother soon. If you can become the princess of my royal brother, most of the royal brothers will be made the Imperial Brothers by the royal brothers in the future, and they will also live in the palace in the future. In this way, you will also live in the palace, so won't you be able to live with me every day, see each other all day, eat together, play together, and sleep together?" Both of her eyes were sparkling. Jiang Xuaning remembered that Shenzai treated herself very sincerely in this life, and she wanted to refuse directly, but in the face of such a gaze, when the words came to her mouth, she couldn't say much. "But if you don't make it clear." The fact that she had not presented her name and surname but had entered the palace by mistake to read it once again came to her mind, and then what came to mind was what she had experienced after entering the palace and what would happen in the future. She was so scared and tired. After experiencing the prosperity of the previous life, Jiang Xuaning really didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. She suddenly looked back at Shenzai with an unprecedentedly serious gaze, gently took out the string of purple glass earrings from her hand, put them back on the makeup, and said, "Xuaning was summoned into the palace by His Highness by exception, and His Highness must know better than me about the twists and turns in the middle. His Royal Highness should also know that the person who originally reported to the palace from the Zhang mansion was not me. Can get the blue eyes of His Royal Highness, enter the palace by edict, and serve and be taken care of by His Royal Highness many times." Xuaning was also very happy to know His Highness. But the life in the palace is not what Xuaning likes. Xuaning comes from a humble background and has no ambitions, she just wants to go back to the countryside of her childhood, and she has a heart. Shenzai was stunned. She didn't expect Jiang Xuaning to say such a thing. The string of purple glass in her hand was gone, replaced by her slightly warm palm. But a wave of anger came up from the bottom of my heart. Shenzai wanted to say, "I treat you so well, how dare you think of leaving," but as soon as she touched Jiang Xuaning's gentle and sincere gaze, the anger that had just risen was slowly extinguished as if it was pressed down by the flowing water of the veins, and turned into a little lonely and pitiful. She said, "You don't like the palace?" Jiang Xuaning said, "Life here is very unpleasant." Shenzai held her breath. "Then you say, who told you not to be happy? I will give them all a pleasure and make you happy. It's just a child's temper." Her eyes widened, her thin eyebrows raised, and although there was an old scar under the corner of her eye, it did not damage the dignity of her princess. "It's just that his cheeks are puffed out twice, and his lips are pursed tightly, obviously refusing to give up." Jiang Xuaning was extremely helpless. At the moment, I was afraid that this topic would continue, but it would arouse her temper, give herself a non-stop, and secretly let her marry Shenju, so there was nowhere to reason, so I sighed and wanted to change the topic, and said, "Let's see what you wear today, the earrings are also quite good looking." But Shenzai is not such a foolish person. She just likes Jiang Xuaning as a playmate. While dressing up with her, he searched his intestines and scraped his belly, and he hollowed out his mind to get words out of her mouth, and asked, "Is it the palace people who yangs his eye treat you badly? The dogs in the internal affairs office treat you badly? That one named you bullies you again? You just say, who made you unhappy? Ning Ning." This posture is as if Jiang Xuning said that she is going to kill one. Jiang Xuning broke out in a cold sweat on her head. But Shen Ziyi's questions are one after another, and the guesses are more bizarre than the other. A mouth and a horn suddenly finished talking, just like a noisy starling. Jiang Xuning looked up to the sky and sighed. For the first time, she wanted to give herself a big mouth. She knew this was the case. She directly said to Shen Ziyi, "I would rather be His Highness's companion than His Royal Highness's sister-in-law," but I was afraid that Shen Ziyi would be happy to directly dispel the idea of letting her marry Shenju. Where is the use of being asked by her over and over again like now? The true feeling has been struck by lightning. Finally, after Shen Ziyi said the 23rd bizarre guess, Jiang Xuning couldn't help but withstand the test of temptation, and tried to speak. "Since your highness cares so much about whether I am happy or not, then I just said, in fact, I will be happy when I leave the palace." Shen Ziyi showed a sweet smile at her. "Ning Ning, you are dreaming." Jiang Xuning. Shen Ziyi hung the string of purple glass earrings on her, and coaxed her very heartily, "Change one, change, this princess will definitely do it for you." Jiang Xuning silently cried in her heart, pondered for a long time, and suddenly had a daring thought in her head. "The most unhappy thing for me is to learn the piano. Mr. Xie grabbed me to learn the piano twice in 3 days, and the requirements were extremely strict." Shen Ziyi. Jiang Xuning blinked. "You said you would definitely do it." Shen Ziyi. This time it was Shen Ziyi's turn to cry silently in her heart. The civil and military forces of the Manchu dynasty all knew Mr. Xie's status in education, and you must know that her study in the palace caused criticism from the Manchu dynasty. If there was no approval from Mr. Xie, I am afraid that it would not be possible. And Mr. Xie's teaching posture on weekdays is to give her 100 guts, and she doesn't dare to run rampant in front of him, and he is not allowed to mention Jiang Xuning to learn the piano. But everything can be lost, and the face of the eldest princess of Liang can't be lost. Shen Ziyi endured her weakness and said solemnly, "Mr. Xie is willing to teach you so seriously. The court is too busy with official business, and he has to spend most of the hour every day to teach you to learn the piano, which is something that others can't envy. How can you dislike Mr. Xie for being strict? It's too much." Jiang Xuning wanted to speak, but Shen Ziyi hurriedly said, "If you say one more thing, I will tell Mr. Xie about your dislike of learning the piano." Jiang Xuning. "I didn't even know that you would threaten people with a small report." She was stunned. Shen Ziyi coughed. Her face was not red and her heart was not beating. "Oh, this princess is not omnipotent. Who else makes you unhappy besides these two things? You say it, this princess will definitely administer justice for you." Jiang Xuning thought for a long time, and held back a sentence. "No. It's just that when she finished dressing and putting on makeup, when she was having breakfast with Shen Ziyi, she looked at the half of the orchid made of rose filling on the shortbread that was put in the bowl, picked it up and took a small bite, but slowly closed her eyes." Shen Ziyi asked, "What's wrong?" Jiang Xuning's eyes flashed slightly, looking at the small piece of shortbread, and only said, "It's nothing, but I suddenly remembered that my sister in my family can also make such cake bait, and I miss it a little." After she finished speaking, she changed the topic again and continued eating. Shen Ziyi lowered her eyes and thought for a moment, and seriously remembered the sentence in her heart. After breakfast, the two went to school in Fengchen Palace. When they arrived, the others arrived early. Everyone was talking, and when they heard that the eldest princess of Liang was coming, they all turned their heads to look. But who would have thought that this look, his eyes would not be able to take back. It's just that this gaze did not fall on the eldest princess of Liang, but on Jiang Xuning. When they entered the palace for a long time, most of the companions wore the clothes they brought with them when they came. Jiang Xuning's dress is even more elegant, a little too lazy to dress up because of her own background. But today she came from Mingfeng Palace, and she was wearing the palace clothes that Shenzai wore in the past that the palace people had spent a long time choosing. The snow-white fabric was pressed with layers of fine gold threads. The dark blue crane cloud pattern climbed up from the hem of the dress, and the flowing water patterns on the wide sleeves on both sides of the robe were like splendid stacks, and a white jade exquisite ring was hung around her waist, except for the sachet of the white embroidered peony in the moon. A face is even more delicate and bright. The complexion is already fair, the eyebrows are drawn, the lips are dyed sandalwood, and the look is already flying, and the smile is moving. But what is even more surprising is the feeling. There is no discomfort and unworthiness of the little daughter's family stealing a splendid dress. She is wearing this palace dress. The original careless frivolity and casualness seem to be unconsciously converged into 2 points, holding the hands of the palace people and approaching step by step, showing a kind of coldness and elegance in the ninefold palace. Xiao Shu looked at her for a long time and didn't react. The eldest princess of Liang was happy to show off to everyone, which was the result of her dressing up all morning. When everyone saw Jiang Xuaning's appearance like this and so carefully dressed, they were shocked, but they were all a little pantothenic, but they had to echo and praise on their faces, and for a while they were as complicated as overturning a 5-flavor bottle. Jiang Xuaning also looked in the mirror before coming out of Mingfeng Palace, only to feel that this gorgeous palace dress was worn on her body, and she looked good, but it was like a nightmare. Looking through the makeup mirror, what she saw was not herself, but the queen who couldn't advance and retreat in the previous life, and was prosperous and blind. She wanted to change her body. But seeing that it was time for class, it was too late to change again, so I had to wear such a dress to Fengchen Palace. She didn't sleep all night, her mind was also upset, and she was absent-minded in a class, until the end of the class and saw that everyone had put the piano on the piano table. She suddenly remembered that Xie Wei was teaching the piano in the next class. So he pinched his eyebrows, and then he woke up. The banana nunnery was still in the side hall, and Jiang Xuaning went to the side hall when he left the palace gate. Unexpectedly, Xie Wei was in the side hall very early today. The little eunuch at the entrance of the hall looked at her with some surprise, and after passing through the door, he opened the door and let her in. Jiang Xuaning entered the door. Xie Wei didn't talk about the feast this morning, and he didn't want to stay in the cabinet and quarrel with those old men, so he came to the side hall to deal with official documents, and at this moment he was getting up and taking down his email from the wall, and when he turned his head and saw Jiang Xuaning, he was also stunned. Jiang Xuaning greeted him, "Hello Mr. Xie." Xie Wei's gaze stayed on her for a long time, looking at her clothes and makeup. His brows gradually furrowed, and he only said, "It's not good looking." After speaking, he hugged Ime obliquely and walked outside the temple gate. Jiang Xuaning stood in place, full of lawsuits. What's the matter with this man? Although she herself felt that she didn't like this outfit very much, she could say this from Xie Wei's mouth. Why was she so disagreeable? What kind of makeup and what kind of clothes did her daughter's family wear, and what kind of door could the stinky man see to put his beak? What's more, how could she not be good? The surname Xie is worthy of reading Buddhist scriptures and Taoism on weekdays, and he didn't even touch women in his previous life, so I'm afraid that girls won't like it. Chapter 80, Asleep. Recently, I have been learning the piano for a while, and I have basically learned the right finger technique. After learning a fingering, there is a corresponding qin song to teach them to practice. Xie Wei is very strict, and no one dares to be sloppy. Even Shenzai is well behaved in the hall. Only when Jiang Xuaning was in class today, a pair of eyes widened, and she was not allowed to touch the piano anyway, so she simply sat in the back corner of the third row, looking at Xie Wei coldly, as if she wanted to stare through this person with her eyes. Xie Wei didn't understand what she was trying to do for a while. Fortunately, Jiang Xuaning didn't have a good rest for 2 nights in a row. Her eyes were a little pantothenic. She stared at him for a moment, and the sleepiness came up, and she didn't hold it up after a while, and she yawned, and it was already a very persevering thing to be able to hold onto the desk and go to sleep without closing her eyes, and she couldn't raise any energy to stare at him. A lesson passed in a mess again. When he got out of school, everyone already knew that Zhang Xuning had always been picked up by Mr. Xie when he learned the piano, and no one wanted to stay here to stay with him for a long time. Zhang Xuning couldn't get out. Xie Wei walked down from the hall with the Qin in his arms, but asked, "Why are you staring at me?" Zhang Xuning finally stayed up until the end of class, and just wanted to yawn, but when she heard this, she had to forcibly hold it back, and defended herself. "How could it be? You must have read it wrong. How dare a student do such a thing?" Xie Wei said lightly, "Not only dare to do it, but also dare to lie." Zhang Xuning smirked. "It should be that the student listened carefully to your lecture, was fascinated for a while, and had all kinds of admiration for you, so he was dumbfounded." Xie Wei was unmoved. "Really?" Zhang Xuning was angry when she saw his not salty and indifferent appearance, and suddenly remembered the look on this person when she frowned and said that she was not good looking, so she secretly felt a little revenge, smiled very sweetly, and said, "It may also be that Mr. Xie spoke boringly and very badly today, so the students were confused and could only look at you unconsciously." Xie Wei. "It's boring and confusing." If he said that he was still calm before, after listening to Zhang Xuning's words at this moment, the face of one face suddenly fell, and even the temperature at the bottom of his eyes became a little lower. No one had ever said of him like that. Since he returned to the capital 4 years ago and began to preside over the feast in Wenyuan Pavilion, whether it is a gentleman or a student, whether it is a colleague or an emperor, he has praised him. After a stump in his heart, Xie Wei's thin lip line tightened into a straight one, and for a moment he wanted to attack. But his gaze fell back on Zhang Xuning, and he endured it again. He said calmly, "I almost didn't sleep when I deserted. I don't understand, but I blame Mr. Qi for not being able to teach, and he is also capable." Zhang Xuning's smile remained unchanged. "You are right. It's a bit faceless and skinless, and she is what Xie Wei says." Xie Wei didn't bother with her, so he walked outside the hall. Unexpectedly, as soon as he turned around, Zhang Xuning gently gritted his teeth behind him and muttered, "I can't even ask for a wife, I can't appreciate it. Don't you have the courage to say that I'm not good looking?" "What did you say?" Xie Wei paused, and turned his head directly to look at her. Zhang Xuning felt a chill on the back of her neck, and hurriedly hugged the piano and followed, as if the person who was muttering in a low voice just now was not her at all. She walked to Xie Wei's side unusually dogged, and said, "The student said that he is a big old man and doesn't know how to appreciate anything, but fortunately, Mr. Xie is kind-hearted and willing to give me more guidance. Let's learn the piano." "Really, when he is behind his ears?" Xie Wei stared at her for a long time, feeling that this student had a little bit of 3 days without opening the house and revealing the tiles, and remembered all kinds of rumors about her in the market over the years, and felt that he should restrain her, lest she feel that she was easy to get along with, and she would get along more and more. But when she was about to have a seizure, she saw her eyes shining at herself. "It's a very good look." Xie Wei's reprimanding words came to his mouth, but he couldn't say it. He swallowed it back, only shook off his wide-sleeved robe, and said, "It's good to know who is the gentleman and who is the student. Let's go." He turned away. Zhang Xuning stuck out her tongue at his back, and then followed, and went to the side hall of Fengchen Palace. Xie Wei put Yimei on another piano table, and only said, "In the past few days, I have been teaching the fingering of the right hand, and after today's lecture, it stands to reason that I should have a little understanding of the right fingering and be able to play the corresponding piano music. In the hall, when I play the harp, you sit far away, and I am afraid that you will not be able to see how the fingering is clear. So now I'm going to play it again. You have to look at the details of the fingering carefully, and after I'm done, it's up to you to practice it, and play it for me. Jiang Xuning suddenly had one head and two big. Xie Wei only asked her, understand? Jiang Xuning sat down at her piano table, nodded very sincerely, and said, I understand. As far as Xie Wei is concerned, Qin Yi is already handy. He played the colorful clouds chasing the moon that he demonstrated for everyone in the main hall of Fengchen Hall today. The sound of the piano is murmuring, like flowing water. This kind of Qin music suitable for practicing fingering, the rhythm is simple and brisk, like water droplets bouncing on the Qingling spring water, and like bamboo leaves falling down with the stream. He has always been distracted when he strokes the piano. When the piano was finished, he slowly lowered his palms, suppressed the melodious aftersound of this song, raised his head and said, you can see clearly dash. The word chu was stuck in his throat and came to an abrupt end. Xie Wei's face suddenly turned terribly bad. On the piano table next to her, Jiang Xuning, who was sitting upright when she first came in, and answered I understand with her eyes wide open a moment ago, has fallen down all over her stomach at some point. The piano table is that big. After her face fell down, the jiaoangukan resting on it was squeezed aside, her two arms raised and pillowed under her head, her eyes were already closed, and even her breathing became even. I fell asleep directly. Xie Wei's fingers that were still pressing on the strings suddenly became a little heavy, and he was afraid that he would accidentally break the strings, so he slowly lifted his fingers. The expression on his face slowly disappeared. There was no ring ruler in the side hall, but there was a music sheet to be used today on the bookcase. He stood up and picked up the music book, followed the book in the palm of his hand, and walked towards Jiang Xuning, wanting to call her up. It's just that when he walked over, stood beside her, held up the book of music that was rolled into a cylinder, and wanted to invite her to wake up, but for some reason, he stopped. The palace costumes are complicated, and although they look gorgeous, they are heavy when they are worn. The girl's body is very slender. When he stood or sits, his back was straight, and his eyebrows and eyes were full of anticipation, and he did not feel anything, but now, when he fell asleep on the narrow table with his arms on his pillow, he naturally curled himself up into a little one. This gorgeous palace costume suddenly looked like a pair of hard armor. But what is hidden inside is just a fragile little thing. The girl should be very sleepy, even if there is a layer of fat powder under her eyelids, and you can see a little tired light blue. The eyes are closed, and the thin eyebrows are drooping. Some of the gorgeous lipsticks rubbed on the sleeves of the palace dress because of the kneeling action, like a few petals of falling flowers, and like a falling paintbrush on the paper at random. A string of thin purple glass earrings rested on his ear and cheek. The sky outside was not very bright, but when it passed through the clear purple glass, it reflected a few soft and brilliant lights, reflecting on her snow-white skin. These days, he has been lecturing in the hall, and Jiang Xuning has always listened with his ears pricked up. Is called to the side hall to meditate, and she has never complained obediently. Today, as soon as he didn't pay attention, she fell asleep. Xie Wei's gaze fell on her curly and thick eyelashes, and also on her slightly locked brow, only wondering if she was having some nightmare, and after a long time, she finally took back the score that seemed to be about to knock on her head. But standing next to the girl who has fallen into a deep sleep, I don't know what to do for a while. Such a tricky student. It's really a head Islam. If you knew this was the case, why bother to make yourself this trouble? Did Jiang Xuning learn badly, and what did it have to do with herself? He felt a sigh in his heart. Although he couldn't help but wonder if this little girl played too late last night and didn't know how to rest, and she was so sleepy today, since he experienced the last female commandment and misunderstood her once, he would no longer arbitrarily and easily make conclusions. After standing beside her for a long time, Siewei couldn't hold back, shook his head, and smiled silently. I didn't plan to call her, let her sleep. It's just that he didn't expect that he had just turned around and was about to take advantage of this time to continue to deal with some official documents, when someone knocked on the door outside and said inside, "Mr. Xie, the saint is in the Qianqing Palace, and he is deliberating, please come over." It was a somewhat heavy eunuch's voice. I probably didn't expect that someone was sleeping inside, so the sound was a little loud and not lowered at all. Siewei frowned as soon as he heard this, and subconsciously turned his head to look at Zhang Xuning. Zhang Xuning was taking off her socks and stepping on the water to catch shrimp in her dream, and when she happily heard the sound of Qianqing Palace, she was stunned, and the prawn slipped out of her hand. She was in a hurry, and threw herself forward, her head moving forward a little, and she woke up suddenly. The whole person hasn't reacted yet. She sat up abruptly and shouted, "My fish, my shrimp." Then he raised his eyes and met Siewei's eyes that suddenly became complicated and indescribable. Zhang Xuning. Qin was in front of him, and Siewei was standing in front of him. She suddenly felt that her heart was cold, and her whole person was also cold. Siewei remembered that he had suspected that she had a nightmare before, and suddenly felt that he seemed to be a little too kind recently, so he only looked at her quietly at the moment, and smiled slightly. "The fish is there, the shrimp is there, why don't I go to the imperial dining room again, invite a chef for Miss Ning and have a meal of delicacies from the mountains and seas?" Chapter 81, Pleasure. What fish, what shrimp? Give Zhang Xuning another 100 guts, she won't dare to eat it. But as soon as she talked about eating, she couldn't help but have peach slice cakes popping up in her head. If the man in front of you goes up in person and asks her to eat, isn't it impossible? No, 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 dispel this dangerous thought. Siewei was already taboo that she knew about his things that were not known to others. She wanted to say it accidentally, God knows where this person would think of it, and then it would become a real disaster from her mouth, but it was not good. Thinking of this, Zhang Xuning showed a wry smile on her face, and she was apprehensive, and carefully defended herself. "I slept in the bedroom of Her Royal Highness the eldest princess last night, and I am not used to it, so I will be sleepy today." Siewei's eyebrows moved slightly, on the eldest princess's side. Zhang Xuning nodded very sincerely, and as soon as she raised her arm, the white and delicate palace sleeve robe hung out, and said, "Really, you see, even the clothes were found for me by the eldest princess." The girl looked at him a little timidly, as if she knew that she had made a big mistake, but she didn't mean to argue or admit it, although she also found a reason for herself. Siewei looked at her palace clothes, and his frowning eyebrows did not loosen. But when he spoke, his voice was much calmer than before. "If you haven't slept well, go back and make up for sleep, it just so happens that I have something to do today." Zhang Xuning was overjoyed. She didn't expect Siewei to be so easy to speak, so she wanted to compliment him. "Mr. Xie is really reasonable." Unexpectedly, before her words fell, Siewei had already lightly added, "Today's missing class will be made up tomorrow." Zhang Xuning. She should have known that the surname Xie should have been so unforgiving. She was overjoyed too early. Siewei saw with his own eyes that the smile on the girl's lips froze, and the brightness that had just appeared on his face also sank instantly, and the dark clouds that had accumulated in his heart didn't know why he dispersed a little, and said, "If you know the fingering I talked about today, you must know it tomorrow, if not, you will not." Zhang Xuning immediately nodded like pounded garlic, "Yes, yes, yes." Siewei couldn't help laughing, said flatly, walked out of the side hall first, and went to the Qianqing Palace with the eunuch who had come to pass the word before. Seeing him walking away, Zhang Xuning slowly breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm scared to death." Asterisk. At this moment, there are also people in Zhang Mansion who are frightened. This afternoon, Meng Shi wanted to take Zhang Suiwai to Hanshan Temple to pray for blessings. Before leaving, I sat in the house drinking tea and talking. Meng Shi remembered Zhang Boyu's maintenance of Zhang Xuning between his words, sighed softly, and said, "Originally, the name of our companion in the house was reported to you, but somehow Sister Ning was allowed to enter. She followed Wan Yang and learned an intolerable temperament, but I am afraid that it will not make you feel better in the future. Now that the Marquis of Yanji's mansion is in trouble, His Royal Highness the King of Linzi is about to choose a concubine, I just hope that you can ask for a good sign today, a little lucky." Zhang Suiwai sat under her, but did not speak. His eyes drooped, and he only fell on the embroidered handkerchief on his lap, and he still couldn't understand the meaning of Zhang Xunning's words that day. At this time, the housekeeper outside suddenly came in a hurry to communicate, "Madam, the father-in-law in the palace is here." Meng Shi and Zhang Suiwai stood up almost at the same time. Meng Shi's face turned pale, and his voice trembled. "Is it the matter of the court? Is it the old man's accident? Or is Sister Ning in trouble in the palace again? How does this housekeeper know?" "It's just that Zhang Mansion knows that his second girl had a very thrilling encounter in the palace a few days ago, and she has been uneasy recently, and now there are people in the palace, and they can't help but think about bad things." Unexpectedly, the father-in-law who came in was full of smiles, bowed down and said, "Madam is polite, the eldest girl is polite, our family is ordered by Her Royal Highness the eldest Princess of Liang to go out of the palace, and it is specially announced that the eldest girl Zhang will enter the palace to accompany her, and please let the eldest girl clean up a little and enter the palace with our family, Her Royal Highness the eldest princess is in a hurry." It was Huang Renli who was waiting by Shen Zi's side. However, neither Meng nor Zhang Suiwai knew each other, and they were shocked when they heard this. Meng Shi couldn't believe it. Good manner, how could Her Royal Highness the eldest princess announce our eldest girl to enter the palace? She even had some fear when she said this. Only said, "Could it be that the second girl in our house is in trouble?" Huang Renli came out of the palace, and he was very clear about Zhang Xunning's stay by Her Royal Highness the eldest princess last night, and when she heard Meng Shi's words, she raised her eyebrows in surprise, and the smile on her face faded a little, and said, "Madam, don't worry too much, our Royal Highness loves Zhang Erniang very much, and left the second girl in the palace last night. It's just that when the second girl used the cake bait in the morning, she said that she remembered the cake bait made by the eldest girl, and our Royal Highness remembered it in her heart, guessing that she missed her relatives, so she sent our family to pick up the eldest girl into the palace, and also accompanied His Royal Highness to read, so I saw it every day, and I didn't want to leave the palace." Meng Shi choked and suddenly lost his voice. The eldest princess of Liang let Zhang Suiwai enter the palace, but it was not because she liked Zhang Suiwai, nor because of how talented Zhang Suiwai was, but because Zhang Xuning said a little more casually when she was using shortbread this morning. Zhang Suiwai was even more surprised. She knew in her heart how disgusted Zhang Xuning had been with her since she returned to Beijing, and she didn't even want to give her a good face, and now she actually told the eldest princess of Liang that she remembered the shortbread she made. Zhang Suiwai does know how to make shortbread. But God knows that she once served it to Zhang Xuning, but Zhang Xuning poured all the snacks she made on the ground in front of her. Then he smiled embarrassedly and said to her, "I'm sorry, I didn't pay attention to it, and I wasted your mind." But she was also extremely responsive. Meng's hesitation had caused Huang Renli to frown slightly. Zhang Suiwai hurriedly bowed down and said, "Thanks to Her Royal Highness the eldest princess." Suiwai thanked Her Royal Highness the eldest princess for her grace, so she packed up and went with her father-in-law. Huang Renli said in his heart that this girl was quite clever, so he nodded. His face was a little pale.
星号
Zhang Xuning, who finally escaped from Xie Wei's hands, returned to Yang's Hizai from the side hall of Fengchen Palace, and it was useless to even have lunch, so he directly plunged into his bed, closed his eyes and covered his head and fell asleep. It wasn't until someone from the palace came to call her in the afternoon that she woke up. It turned out that the eldest princess of Liang was playful for a while, and called the palace people in her palace to play with the pitcher, and simply came to Yang's his eye to call the companions to read together. Everyone entered the palace to accompany Shenzai to study, and secondly, to be her playmate. Shenzai is invited, who dares not to go? Jiang Xuning slept just right, so she quickly got up to wash up, and went to Mingfeng Palace with everyone. Shenzai was playing crazy with people, and it was rare for the palace people in the palace to see her happy and play with her. The corner of Jiang Xuning's mouth twitched as soon as she stepped into the palace. The corner was twitched. I don't know where Shenzai learned the tricks. Some palace people pasted long notes on their faces, and even drew their faces with ink pens, and they looked a little depressed. Obviously they were all punished for losing. As soon as the companions came, they were immediately pulled by her to play together. Naturally, there are people in the middle who are eager to take this opportunity to curry favor with Shenzai, and they are very positive. Jiang Xuning is not. She didn't eat at noon, and was a little hungry, and when she saw that there were some candied pastries in the hall, she didn't rush up, but paddled in confusion, and everyone was playing in front, so she sat in the back and ate first. Of course, Shenzai saw her at a glance, but when she saw her sitting there eating, she thoughtfully didn't call her. Everyone played a round of pitching first. Shenzai often hits the arrow with an arrow in her hand, and she is considered a good player, and often wins the applause of everyone, and Jiang Xuning follows from afar. But some people are not used to her being so idle, so they beckon to her. Isn't Miss Jiang coming to play? I heard that you used to wander around the market, and you must be the best at these games. Don't you come to show us your hand? Jiang Xuning looked up and saw that it was Chen Chuyi. There was a faint smile on the corner of this young lady's mouth, and she looked at her with deep meaning, and her expression was how to look at it and how to mock it. Jiang Xuning had just taken a small bite of the candied fruit in her hand, put it down gently, and was about to speak. Unexpectedly, Shenzai frowned, and said directly to Chen Chuyi, "Didn't you see Ning Ning eating? She will come to play after eating. What are you talking about? That's too unkind to say." Everyone was stunned. Chen Chuyi herself didn't expect it at all. Her mouth opened slightly, and she was a little overwhelmed for a while. You know, Chen Chuyi is also the pearl of Chen University's palm, and her identity is also noble. She plays with Xiao Shu all day long. Who in the palace doesn't sell her face? It was Shenzai who used to be kind to her. Now it's just a question about Jiang Xuning, which directly caused her to have a seizure. Chen Chuyi's face was a little unbearable, red and white for a while, and she opened her mouth to defend herself. "Your Highness, I don't have." Shenzai's face was expressionless, and she said coldly, "If you don't mean it, just shut your mouth." The hall was silent for a moment. Jiang Xuning also looked at Shenzai in a daze. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that the eldest princess of Liang doesn't seem to be in a very good mood, and between her words, she is completely defending Jiang Xuning, and even a lady like Chen Chuyi doesn't want to give any face. What kind of skill does Jiang Xuning have to make people like this? Yu had a big enmity with Jiang Xuning during the rest of the year, and hated her to the core, but she didn't dare to say anything, let alone make any moves, lest she fall into Jiang Xuning's trap, and at this moment she could only express her disdain and indignation for Jiang Xuning with her eyes. And then, before she had time to think about it, Jiang Xuning turned her eyes after a while. What kind of look she wanted to make to Jiang Xuning in order to arouse the other party's unhappiness and anger, and this look had already been seen by Shenzai. Shenzai stared at her for a moment and raised her eyebrows. "What do you mean by looking at Ning Ning with this kind of look?" You. She was stunned. "Say you don't dare, you can't do it, it's all right, and now you can't even use your eyes. Yu was so frightened that she directly withdrew her gaze and said tremblingly, I. Shenzai didn't listen at all. Look at Ning Ning with this kind of eyes again, I'll ask someone to gouge out your eyeballs. Yu shuddered, cold sweat broke out on her forehead, her face turned pale instantly, and she almost knelt on the ground to admit her mistake. She didn't even dare to raise her head at this time, she only said in a loud voice, yes, yes. First of all, Chen Shuyi was immediately reprimanded without doing anything, and then Yu was threatened with a terrifying look in her eyes, and the other companions felt that the atmosphere was not right. Most people are afraid to speak. Yao Shi glanced at Chen Shuyi and Yu, and gently opened her mouth to persuade her, Sister Shuyi should have no malice, second Miss Yu is just looking at it, Her Royal Highness the eldest princess may have misunderstood, right? Misunderstanding. Shenzai didn't really want to play pitching pot to call them today. Zhang Xuaning's sentence, the days here are not happy in the morning, she has not forgotten. In the past, I was not careful, but now I secretly observe, and I can see many clues. She sneered. With the pen in his hand that had just painted the face of the palace man who had just lost, he walked slowly in front of Yao Shi, looked her up and down, and said, Miss Yao is compassionate, or I will give you a clear brother, and simply send you to Baiyun Nunnery to be a sister-in-law, so that your compassionate heart can be of some use. Yao Shi didn't show any malice towards Zhang Xuaning, she just stood up and said something for Chen Shuyi and Yu. He even threatened to be sent to be a nun. What girl's family would dare to face such a thing? Everyone gasped. Yao Shi didn't expect that he would be scolded if he said a fair word, he hated and was afraid for a while, the fingers hanging on his side were quietly clenched, and the situation was extremely embarrassing, but he didn't even dare to say a word. Zhang Xuaning's candied fruit is still in her mouth, with a little sweet and sour. At this moment, I was so shocked that I couldn't swallow it. Her gaze wandered among the crowds, and then fell back to Shenzai's body, completely unaware of what the noble princess Her Royal Highness was crazy about, how to be scared when she saw people. Although she felt, it's cool. Shenzai touched her slightly admiring gaze in the blink of an eye, and a red glow suddenly flew over her face, only to feel that there were white clouds floating under her feet, and the whole person was about to fly, so she pretended to avoid this gaze inadvertently. Turning his head to the others, he had a cold face. Actually said loudly, I said it in the past, whoever dares to offend Ning Ning, don't blame me for being unkind. I didn't expect that there would always be someone who would turn a deaf ear. Don't think that I came to you today to have fun with you, and I asked you to come just to warn you, but whatever this princess can manage, whoever wants to make Ning Ning unhappy, I will make her 10 times more unhappy. The arrows used for pitching are still on the table. The faces of the palace people were still glued with notes and ink marks. But the banter and laughter of the Millie were gone. After reading this, all the companions finally understood, it turned out that they were called Li Wei today. For Zhang Xuaning alone. For a while, they all had their own thoughts in their hearts, but after listening to Shenzai's previous scolding words, no one dared to open their mouths to refute or speak for anyone, and they all trembled without exception. Xiao Shu is quite calm. It's just that she quietly withdrew her gaze at Zhang Xuaning, and when she lowered her head, she couldn't help but feel a little jealous and unhappy. Because, Shenzai's warning undoubtedly included her. But her identity is different after all. With Empress Dowager Xiao here, she doesn't care much about Shenzai's words, and she is not as stupid as a few other people. Your Highness, someone has arrived. At this moment, Huang Renli had a festive smile on his face, entered the hall with a whisk in his hand, and bowed down to salute Shenzai. The crowd couldn't help but look at him. At this time, I was very puzzled, who is the person who picked it up? Shenzai's expression suddenly relaxed, as if she was also happy, and actually walked to Jiang Xunning's side and said to Huang Renli, "Call someone in and give Ning Ning a surprise." Huang Renli waved his hand. Jiang Xuiwei, who was waiting outside, then straightened her mind, bowed down and walked into the hall, did not squint, and did not dare to look more, pinching the hand embroidered 85 pa folded in front of her, and bowed straight to the front. "Courtier Jiang Xuiwei, I have seen Her Royal Highness the eldest princess, Her Royal Highness the eldest Princess Jinan." It turned out to be Jiang Xunning's sister, Jiang Xuiwei, the eldest lady of the Jiang family. Everyone was amazed. Shenzai waved her hand and said, "Flatten, from today onwards, you will also be one of the princess's companions. You are Ning Ning's sister, and having you with Ning Ning can also make her happier." As soon as these words came out, everyone's eyes widened. A Jiang family has two companions, and listening to the meaning of the eldest princess's words, she specially called such a person to accompany Jiang Xuning. "I have any expression at the moment," is different from Jiang Xuning, who returned to Beijing at the age of 14 and 15. Jiang Xuiwei is a serious girl who was taught in a high-ranking family in Beijing. Her words and deeds are elegant and magnificent. She is very upright and calm, and her eyebrows are light and graceful, which is completely different from the bright and stunning feeling that Jiang Xuning gives people. However, no one can be happy about this. Jiang Xuiwei thanked the eldest princess of Liang for her grace, and then got up. Her embroidered handkerchief was originally between her fingers, but with the movement of getting up, it also fell down and unfolded gently, revealing the red ginger flowers embroidered on the snow-white corner. Xiao Shu only frowned when she saw people at first. But when this embroidered handkerchief fell into her eyes with this red ginger flower, she was originally calm and couldn't make waves, as if she didn't put herself in the midst of everyone's detachment, suddenly shattered, and her complexion changed faintly and suddenly. Shenzai took Jiang Xunning's hand and laughed as if she was invited. "How is it, Ning Ning, are you happy now?" Jiang Xunning's gaze drifted lightly towards Xiao Shu, and her gaze was directly opposite her, and when she saw her expression, she suddenly realized that Xiao Shu at this age was nothing more than that. "If you dare to do anything to harm me, I will dare to put the person you really fear right under your nose. It makes you sleepless and restless." Her sister may not be a fuel-efficient lamp, and you should be optimistic. A kind smile bloomed on her lips, and when Jiang Xuning looked back at Shenzai, she was already smiling sincerely, and said sweetly, "Your Highness Lao, it's a pleasure now." Chapter 82, Ning Er. Jiang Xuning is happy, but some people are not happy. Until now, who can't see that the eldest princess of Liang is doing all this for Jiang Xuning? Jiang Xuiwei's entry into the palace is certainly quite eye-catching, but smart people can realize that Jiang Xuning is standing behind this matter. When she said the word happy, I don't know how many people in the hall darkened their faces. That is, no matter how good the mood was, this moment was also destroyed. Next, Shenzai also invited Jiang Xuiwei to play together. There were a few people in the crowd who were obviously accompanied by a smile, and Xiao Shu never said a word since Jiang Xuiwei appeared with the Fangjinpsa. At night, the palace lights are lit up. After returning from the Mingfeng Palace, he finally arrived at his own room. The eldest lady of the Xiao clan and the niece of the Empress Dowager of the harem, without the attention of others, finally let all other expressions disappear on his face, leaving only the calm that was almost cold and silent. Finally, he raised his hand and gently pressed his forehead. Xiao Shu slowly closed her eyes, but the curvature of her fingers was tense one by one, and when she opened her eyes again, she directly swept the teacup on the table to the ground. The palace man who was waiting next to her was startled and looked at her with wide eyes. Xiao Shu's chest rose and fell slightly, but she didn't look at others. All that came to her mind was the embroidered handkerchief that fell from his sleeve when she met Shenju, the king of Linzi, and the side she saw on Jiang Xuiwei today. Others may have forgotten about it, but she still remembers it clearly. It's not Jiang Xuning, That person is not Jiang Xuning. But who would have thought? During this time in the palace, Shenju also paid attention to Jiang Xuning everywhere, and there was a lot of concern in his words. There was an accident in the Yanji Marquis mansion, and Yan Lin directly cleared up Jiang Xuning's relationship. All kinds of clues point to her. That's why last time. The fingers on the table clenched little by little, and Xiao Shu only felt a kind of inconsistent mockery. Not only did he not get rid of the real threat, but he also showed traces and made a real strong enemy for himself. Jiang Xuning is still sharp after all. Asterisk. At the same time, in Jiang Xuning's room, the atmosphere was quite delicate. After the tossing of the eldest princess of Liang here, all kinds of ornaments have long been available, soft and exquisite, and a calligraphy and painting hanging on the wall at will are the true works of the famous people of the previous dynasty. Jiang Xuiwei is a knowledgeable person who can tell at a glance. Naturally, the palace people had already set up her room, but it was no different from other companions. But when he was invited to Jiang Xuning's house to see, he easily discovered the huge gap between the two, the chasm, and had a very intuitive and clear understanding of how favored his sister was in the palace. Jiang Xuning had already changed out of the complicated palace dress, only wearing a simple azure lotus pattern pleated skirt, and even the bun that had been bothered to be twisted before was scattered, and the long black hair was scattered behind her head, and a few strands were gently wrapped by her slender fingers and curled. She only looked at Jiang Xuiwei with a little smile rather than a smile. Jiang Xuiwei sat opposite her, calm as water, and said, "What do you want to do when you let me enter the palace?" Jiang Xuning had a piano in front of him, but it was not a banana hermitage, just an ordinary piano. She held out her fingers and flicked them lightly. When he heard the trembling rhyme, he said in a good time, "They all came to this palace, and they did bring that embroidered handkerchief. The eldest sister wants to say that she doesn't know why I let you enter the palace, but it's too fake, right?" Jiang Xuiwei looked down at the embroidered handkerchief, and sighed lightly, "How much you hate me, and what is our relationship? You and I can't be clearer. If you want to help me, I don't believe it." Her eyebrows and eyes are actually a little bit like Wan Niang. Jiang Xuning looked at it, and the fingers that were playing with the strings stopped, but what she remembered was what she did in her previous life because she hated the person in front of her. After inadvertently learning that Shenju, the king of Linzi, secretly belonged to the owner of the embroidered handkerchief, she tried her best to prevent Jiang Xuiwei from participating in the selection of concubines, but she took this embroidered handkerchief and encountered Shenju again. So she robbed Jiang Xuiwei of her marriage, became the princess of Linzi, and became the queen, completely trampling the sister she hated under her feet. But is it happy and triumphant in the end? I didn't seem to be very happy, nor was I very proud. Jiang Xuiwei is still doing well. Sometimes, Jiang Xuning even thinks, she robbed Jiang Xuiwei of her marriage. Does Jiang Xuiwei know about it? She didn't be able to show her off from start to finish. Because soon after she was elected Princess Linzi, Jiang Xuiwei married away and left the capital, and she had no chance to tell the sister the truth, show off to her, and induce her hatred. It's good that you know that I won't help you. Every step in this palace is dangerous. Some people misunderstand something, and use the means that should have been applied to you to me, but don't you almost lose your life? Jiang Xuning hooked her lips mockingly, recalling that she saw Xiao Shu suddenly changing face today, and she really felt refreshed. Someone saw you come with that embroidered handkerchief today, and their faces changed. I think my sister's life in the palace in the future will not be very satisfactory. Naturally, we just stood by and watched, sitting on the mountain and watching the tiger fight. If you change someone else, you may not be able to guess who framed it that time. After all, nothing happened. But Xiao Shu was unlucky, and the person she met was not only Jiang Xuning, but also the reborn Jiang Xuning. Now no one knows Xiao Shu's covetousness for the position of future queen, but Jiang Xuning fought to the death with her in the last life, but she knew from the beginning that under that seemingly lofty face, there was also a hidden ambition and fierce desire. There are a string of clues, and it is difficult not to suspect her. When Jiang Xuiwei heard her words, she immediately remembered what she heard a few days ago. Sister Ning was framed in the palace and related to the rebellion of the heavenly sect and the rebellion, and she almost lost her life. The bottom of my heart was suddenly awe-inspiring. It was only then that she vaguely understood, that incident was actually related to herself. Jiang Xuning can naturally tell her the cause and effect, so that she can be wary of Xiao Shu, but after all, she can't help but mind Jiang Xuiwei, and this sister is indeed not stupid. She doesn't need to say it, and she doesn't bother to say it. It was to divert the topic. She fiddled with her fingering, thinking that she must not make a mistake when she went to Xie Wei's side to learn the piano tomorrow, but she said casually, "Do you know who you lost the embroidered handkerchief?" Jiang Xuiwei looked at her steadily, and finally lowered her eyes and said slowly, "I know about it." Zheng. Jiang Xunning's fingers trembled slightly, and even the sound of the piano trembled. She suddenly raised her hand to look back at Jiang Xuiwei, but her eyes were suddenly sharp, as if she wanted to see her through at this moment. No. Jiang Xuiwei actually said that she probably knows. If she already knew at this time, then in the previous life, she took her embroidered handkerchief to meet by chance with Shenju and snatched her marriage. Jiang Xuiwei should also know. But she never had a seizure. Jiang Xuning even thought that she didn't know from beginning to end. What's wrong? Jiang Xuiwei thought that this second sister, who had always hated her, should have understood the whole picture of the matter when she did what happened today. But why, after she answered truthfully, Sister Ning showed such a look? She didn't quite understand. Jiang Xuning was speechless for a long time. Looking down at the piano in front of him, he only felt that he was in no mood to practice the piano, so he directly stretched out his hand to push the piano and said coldly, "I'm tired, I've said almost everything I need to say, please go back." She had always been so moody, and it was rare for her to sit down and talk to her patiently for a while, and it was not surprising that she had been ordered to be evicted. Although Jiang Xuiwei felt that she had something to say, she didn't want to ask too much. So he got up, told her to go to bed early, and pushed the door and walked out. That night, Jiang Xuning couldn't sleep again. Asterisk. The next morning, when I went to Fengchen Hall to attend classes, the palace people added an extra seat in the second row and asked Jiang Xuiwei to sit down, and the original 8 companions officially became 9. Naturally, the gentlemen who came to give the lecture were amazed. Because Jiang Xuiwei was added halfway, and they didn't learn the homework they taught in the past, the gentlemen couldn't help but be a little worried. There are people who are not used to Jiang Xuiwei, or who transfer their hatred for Jiang Xuning to her, although they have all heard that the eldest girl of the Jiang family is different from the second girl who does not learn and has no skills, and she is a real lady, but the things taught by Mr. Gong are different after all, and Jiang Xuiwei can't know everything, so she is waiting to see a good show and want to see her make a fool of herself in public. But what happened next was like a slap in the face. Jiang Xuiwei will not only know, but everything. Although the lintel of Jiang's mansion is not high, the Meng family really raises Jiang Xuning as a high-ranking lady, and the poetry and songs, and the etiquette are all excellent. It's just that she doesn't like to be public, and she rarely shows it in front of people, so few people know about it. Now, because he had to answer the gentleman's questions in the palace, and because he didn't understand the situation in the palace, he didn't dare to be sloppy and perfunctory, and he was very serious, and easily won the gentleman's amazement. The current gentlemen are different from those Jiang Xuning encountered when he first entered the palace to study. After Zhao Yanhong's incident, everyone probably knows what kind of person Xie Wei is, and he no longer dares to favor Xiao Shu on the surface. Jiang Xuiwei is Jiang Xuning's sister again. Who in this palace doesn't know that Jiang Xuning is being taken care of by Her Royal Highness the eldest princess? They do want to flatter, but Jiang Xuning's studies are too poor, even if they are thick-skinned, they can't boast about it. Well, here comes a Jiang Sui. Just right. First, she is Jiang Xuning's sister, and she was also selected into the palace by the eldest princess. Second, she is thoughtful, gentle, and virtuous, and will not embarrass her husband, and she does not look like Jiang Xuning's thorny head at all. Third, she is very knowledgeable and familiar with poetry and books, which is really rare. Of course, the gentlemen no longer hesitate to praise Jiang Sui. However, in just 2 or 3 days, Jiang Sui, who had just entered the palace, had already become a favorite and appreciated sweetheart by gentlemen in the Fengchen Palace. Originally, Xiao Shu was a standout in the Fengchen Palace. Now that he has made a trip to bite the gold halfway, he has gradually suppressed Xiao Shu's light, and the two moons are competing for glory, and it is really surprising for a while. Whether Xiao Shu is happy or not, it is difficult for others to see. But Jiang Xuning knows her temperament. In the past, she was able to transcend things and be dustless under her eyes, but it was just because no one could pose a threat to her. But once you feel threatened, the indifference that was originally high above will naturally be precarious because of the change in the situation. Therefore, as long as she thinks about Xiao Shu's current mood, Jiang Xuning feels very happy in her heart. No way. After fighting for so long in her previous life, she attacked herself again in this life because of the misunderstanding of the embroidered handkerchief. Of course she couldn't be too polite to her. What's more interesting is that Jiang Sui's background is not as good as Xiao Shu. Although she is very liked by Mr. in Fengchen Palace, she is not a little arrogant in Suri, and her behavior is approachable, which is completely different from Xiao Shu, who always holds a point, and is very popular. Even Chen Shuyi is willing to talk to her. And there have always been rumors in Beijing, saying that the relationship between the two sisters of the Jiang family has always been bad, and Jiang Xuning is domineering in the house, always bullying the sister with a soft personality. Therefore, those who did not have a good relationship with Jiang Xuning approached Jiang Sui intentionally or unintentionally, wanting to make friends with her. Yu felt that there was another big help, and on this day, she walked on the road and came to Jiang Sui's side, and said to her with a smile, "I saw Miss Jiang at various banquets in the past, and I always knew that the eldest girl was capable, but I didn't expect it to be so good. Compared to the second girl Jiang who doesn't learn and doesn't know how much, one is in the sky and one in the ground." Jiang Sui glanced at her and didn't speak. Chen Shuyi also said lightly next to her, "Obviously, you are the eldest daughter in the family, and you are not much taller than your sister in terms of knowledge and talent, but you can swallow your anger and be bullied by her in the house, but it is really a strange story. If I were you, if I encountered this kind of corrupt style and did not learn and did not know how to do it, I would have to treat her well when I had the opportunity. Otherwise, the reputation of the whole house would be ruined by her." In the past few days, everyone has not known to have said Jiang Xuning once in front of Jiang Sui. Jiang Sui always listens and does not refute, and everyone acquiesces that the discord between the two sisters is true, and the words arranged behind them gradually become presumptuous. Everyone thinks that Jiang Sui should be the same enemy as them. But who would have thought that as soon as Chen Shuyi's words came out, Jiang Sui's delicate eyebrows actually frowned, and she stopped looking at her, and said a little coldly, "Although my second sister is indeed unlearned, she has not reached the point of ruining the style and losing the reputation of the house." Miss Shuyi's words are a bit biased and unfair. Although my Jiang mansion is not as good as some high-ranking families, but the discipline at home is also strict. If my sister has any faults, her own father and mother have to worry about. Why should Miss Shuyi say more? Everyone was stunned. Jiang Sui actually spoke for Jiang Xuning. The relationship between these two sisters has always been bad. Chen Shuyi's complexion changed slightly, her pupils shrunk, and she looked at Zhang Suiwai. Zhang Suiwai looked back at her neither humbly nor arrogantly. Yu couldn't help but gasp, and only then did she recall with everyone, no matter how bad the relationship between people is, they are all surnamed Zhang, sisters from the same house. The so-called sister is that I scolded 10,000 words myself when I returned home, and I will not allow others to slander at will. What's more, with the reputation of the family and the honor and disgrace of the family, it is just enough to say a few words vaguely in the past. No one can answer this time. The atmosphere was a little awkward. At this time, Zhang Xuning held a book in his hand, opened his door, walked out of it, and when he raised his eyes from a distance, he saw them outside Yang's his eye, and it was even more difficult to speak. Zhou Baoying, who was still standing in the middle of the crowd, looked at Zhang Xuning with some curiosity, and asked softly and glutinously, "We are talking to senior sister Zhang about you, second sister Zhang, are you going to learn the piano again?" As soon as Zhang Xuning saw this group of people gathered together, she knew that they didn't have anything good to say. Zhou Baoying said that when everyone was talking about her, some people's faces changed. She was stunned in her heart, and only said, "I'll go and see if Mr. Xie is there." Xie Wei told her last time that he asked her to go to the side hall to practice fingering the next day, but when she arrived the next day, Xie Wei did not. The palace people said that the previous dynasty was busy and couldn't get away for the time being. For several days, he did not reappear in the Fengchen Palace, and he did not attend a single class. It stands to reason that Zhang Xuning can't go to the side hall to learn the piano, but she doesn't know when Xie Wei will finish being busy, and the palace people don't know it, so she has to go to the side hall every day and wait for a moment. If Xie Wei doesn't come, she will leave again. It's the same today. At this moment, there is no Shenzai here. Although Yu was completely stunned by Zhang Xuning, she would never dare to speak in front of her, but there was Chen Shuyi next to her. Hearing Zhang Xuning talk about learning the piano, she chuckled, and even glanced at Zhang Suiwai, who was quite faceless, and said meaningfully, "I have always heard that Mr. Xie and Master Zhang have old friends, and the second girl Zhang is so worried about learning the piano, and she is willing to bother to teach. Now that Miss Zhang has also come to the palace, she is proficient in piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting. It's a pity that Mr. has been busy recently and has not come to teach, otherwise he would have been very happy to see such a beautiful jade as Miss Zhang. After all, I've been facing the rotten wood for too long, and I really feel sorry for Mr. Xie." There was a hint of provocation in his words. But Zhang Suiwai didn't answer. Even Zhang Xuning didn't mean to be angry, she still smiled, and only said to Chen Shuyi, "What Miss Shuyi said today, Xuning has written it down, and she will definitely tell Her Royal Highness the eldest princess when she sees her tomorrow." Chen Shuyi didn't expect her to say such a thing and threaten her face to face with a small report. He choked up in one breath, and his face was extremely ugly. Thinking of the scene of being reprimanded by Princess Liang that day, her body trembled slightly angry. Zhang Xuning didn't bother to look at her anymore, snorted coldly, then took the book in her hand, walked straight past her, didn't put this group of people in her eyes at all, straightened her back, and strode towards Fengchen Palace. There was only a small eunuch guarding the entrance to the temple. Zhang Xuning walked up the steps and asked, "Is Mr. Xie here today?" The little eunuch shook his head, pushed the door open for her, and replied, "No news. However, I heard that Mr. Xie was busy in the previous dynasty, and he didn't close his eyes for 2 nights, and he returned to the house last night, and he may not come today." Zhang Xuning nodded and entered the hall. Imei hangs high on the wall, and Jiaoan lays flat on the piano table. She entered the hall and sat down at the piano table. The scroll in his hand was put down, and it was a medical book. When she met Zhang Sha on the street that day and saw him carrying medicine, She suddenly remembered that Zhang She's mother was not in good health and suffered from head wind. It just so happened that Xie Wei was busy these days, and she had leisure while practicing the piano, so she asked Shen Zai to borrow a medical book from Tai Hospital to read. In her early years, she grew up in the countryside, and she also played with the foot doctor, but she was familiar with some medical science, and the medical writing was not difficult, and she could understand it when she looked at it slowly. It's just that today, the medical book was put down, but Zhang Xuning only looked at it in a daze. Obviously, Zhang Suiwei was allowed to enter the palace. She had already thought about it on the day she was framed by Xiao Shu. Her sister has always been excellent, not to mention that there is an embroidered handkerchief on that side. Even if there is not, it can also let Xiao Shu know that there are people outside the world, there is a sky outside the sky, and she is not the only one in the world. Really watched Zhang Suiwei enter the palace, and she was not as calm as she thought. Is it because she knew very early that the embroidered handkerchief was picked up by Shenju? Or is it because Zhang Suiwei is indeed as good as others say? She grew up in the countryside, and Zhang Suiwei grew up in the capital. She played spearfish, and Zhang Suiwei learned piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting. She is stubborn and doesn't know how to advance and retreat, but Zhang Suiwei is virtuous and wise. In the previous life, she was unhappy, jealous, and even hated because of this. And in this life, it is not easy to calmly accept that you are indeed not as good as others. One is the eldest girl Zhang and the other is the second girl Zhang. It seems that it is born to compete. Not only did others compare them, but even she couldn't help but subconsciously compare them. The medical book was put in front of him, and Zhang Xuning only looked at the words on the cover in a daze, and was distracted for a while. She didn't even notice that someone was coming in from outside. Xie Wei changed into the dusty blue robe today. A green hosta hair was very simple. It was just a trip to the side hall of Feng Chen Palace, but when he arrived at the door, he heard the little eunuch say that the second girl Zhang was there, so he was a little surprised. He pushed the door open and entered. Zhang Xuning was still sitting at the piano table, not moving. Xie Wei held a red letter in his hand, stepped on the velvet blanket without making a sound, stood behind her, looked over her shoulder, and saw the medical book in front of her at a glance. There was a moment of silence. The fishy sweet taste of blood in the old year's mouth mixed with the bitterness of the herbs surged together, and Xie Wei couldn't help but think, this little quack doctor who almost killed him back then, the unpopular foot doctor, is thinking about what harmful recipes are he trying to do. This is out of his mind. He walked over, held it up, and tapped it lightly on her head, saying, "Wake up." Zhang Xuning was knocked down, startled, and almost jumped up from her seat. She looked up. Xie Wei walked past her with a smile on his lips, and there was an imperceptible tiredness in his expression, and his face seemed to be paler than when he saw her last time. Xie Wei threw the letter on the bookcase, walked to the wall and raised his hand to hug Yimei, put it on his piano table, took off the piano bag, and tried the sound with his 5 fingers, without raising his head, and said, "I heard that the second girl Ning has been here for the past few days. She should have listened to Xie's words, and she knows how to fingering, right? Ning er." When she heard these 2 words, Zhang Xuning was stunned, so much so that she didn't even listen to what he said. Why didn't she ever think that such a strange name, such an inappropriate 2 words, sounded so pleasing to the ear and so ironed? Zhang Xuning, Zhang Suiwei. Ginger is the surname of a family. Snow, but the sort of the word. There is only one word Ning, which belongs to herself, and also distinguishes her from others. In the previous life, when he met Xie Wei on the way back to Beijing, Xie Wei and others generally called her Zhang Er girl, but a few days later, after being in danger, Xie Wei seemed to have changed his name to her, not Zhang Er, but Ning Er. It hasn't changed in this life. But she never understood why, and she didn't know what was wrong with Siewei's brain. But in the previous life, she didn't want to have any contact with Siewei, and she was too scared at the beginning of this life, but later she got used to it, and she never asked, and rarely thought about why he called her like that. There were some waves in my heart, but what was sour? Everyone calls her second Miss Zhang, but in the past, I didn't think that when I had Zhang Suiwei, I was how to listen to it and how harsh it was. Zhang Xunning's eyes were a little hot. She has always known that Siewei has insight into people's hearts, and no one can be the right one, and she has also learned in the past. But he didn't know that this person had seen her through so early, not called Zhang Er, but Ning Er. No wonder everyone in the government and the opposition praised her. It's just that she was so stupid in her last life that she didn't understand. Obviously, this person spoke harshly to her in the previous life, hurt her face, and embarrassed her, but in this life she was also afraid of him, and because she didn't have a good impression of him when she learned the piano, she felt that he was hateful. For these 2 words, she actually felt that Siewei didn't seem to be so excessive. Zhang Xuning sat at the piano table, looked at him, and forgot to answer. Siewei's words came out, and he didn't hear them back for a long time. His eyebrows frowned, and he raised his eyes to look, but saw that the girl's black and white eyes were looking straight at him. Her eyes were a little red, her eyelashes trembled, and the tears in her eyes rolled down. "Why did you cry again?" He paused, raised his hand and pinched his eyebrows, felt a deep headache, and sighed helplessly. "Who recruited you again?" Chapter 83, Peach Cake and Sachets. Today she came to learn the piano, neither to quarrel, nor to sell grievances, not to mention that Siewei didn't recruit her and didn't provoke her, but for a while she thought more from the title Ning Er, so that she touched her heart, and suddenly she couldn't control it. Crying in front of people is a shame after all. Zhang Xuning hurriedly raised her sleeves and wiped it on her face, wiping her face red and dying, like a cat. She only said, "The sand is in your eyes, it's okay." Siewei was speechless. Zhang Xuning cheered up, looked fine, put the medical book aside, and asked him, "Mr. is going to take the school fingering test today, and still play Kaiun Chasing the Moon?" Siewei looked at her, and said, "Will." Zhang Xuning didn't speak, but only straightened the piano on the table. She hasn't been slacking off in the past few days. In the past, she didn't play the piano because Siewei said that she was not quiet and didn't let her touch it, but she actually always knew that learning things under Siewei couldn't get away with it, let alone be lucky, just because this person was very serious about everything. At this moment, she didn't think about anything, just stroked the strings and played the finger song. It's a winter afternoon like this again. Because Siewei came today and no one informed him in advance, the charcoal basin in the side hall was not very warm when it was just burned, and the window sash was half open, showing a bit of loneliness and coldness. The wind blew in, and the sky with some chill was wrapped in the wind and fell on the corner of his pale green robe. Siewei stood in front of the bookcase, with a distance in between, watching Zhang Xuning stroke the chin. It's true that the heart is hard to be quiet. But stillness is indeed a material that can be made. The tears in the corners of the girl's eyes have not dried, her face is red and pink, a pair of rippling eyes naturally hang down, and her long eyelashes cover it lightly, which is a kind of seriousness that has never been seen in the past. The 5 fingers are slender and the best for playing the strings. Gongshang Jiao Zhenyu, the tone is accurate, the tone is all together, although the fingering is still a little jerky and shallow, but the appearance on the big face is there, and it has also faded away from the clumsiness of the piano in Fengchen Hall Middle School. Flowing sounds surged from the trembling strings. There was no sound in the hall for a while. When the sound of the piano was about to end, Siewei's figure moved, and he nodded slowly. These days are indeed not wasted, and there is a rough appearance. I didn't come to the side hall to sleep, but I was gratifying. This was a joke about the last time she fell asleep when he stroked the piano. Jiang Xuning opened her mouth and said, "That's the exception." But after justifying himself, the voice fell, and the feeling of hunger in the abdomen naturally came up, turning into a soft sound of cooing. If there are many people, it will be fine, but at this time in the hall only she and Xie Wei are the two, so quiet that even the sound of the needle falling can be heard, and this originally slight sound is as obvious as thunder on a sunny day. Jiang Xuning. Xie Wei. The four looked at each other. One was embarrassed and blushed and hated to dig a pit and drill into the ground, while the other looked at it silently, obviously unexpectedly, and even a little funny. Xie Wei raised a finger and gently pressed his thin lips, but he still couldn't hold back his laughter, and said, "It is indeed an exception. Why didn't I feel enough last time, but I didn't eat enough this time? Those who know say that you are quite loved and favored by the eldest princess in the palace, and those who don't know see your lack of sleep and lack of food are afraid that they will think that you are going to the palace to be tortured and imprisoned. The surname Xie sometimes speaks quite badly." Jiang Xuning secretly gritted her teeth and looked at him without speaking. Xie Wei asked, "Didn't eat?" Jiang Xuning said sullenly, "I forgot the hour when I read in the morning, and I forgot to eat when I didn't pay attention to sleep. The palace is not home, and the imperial dining room waits for no one." Xie Wei rarely wanted to laugh again. According to his old temperament, he would not be too lazy to take care of such a trivial matter. As the saying goes, it is easy to be sleepy when you are full, and it is best for those who are learning to have a sense of hunger in the body to stay awake and concentrate on hard work. That is, it is just right to be hungry. However, Ning Er came to learn the piano, and he played it well. He should have put his heart into it, and a little girl of this age was growing up, so he showed mercy and opened the food box on the corner of the bookcase. There is a small plate of peach cake on the top of the head. Xie Wei took it out and put it on the edge of the tea table, then put the kettle on the stove and boiled it, while calling Jiang Xuning, "Come and drink tea." Since he opened the food box, Jiang Xuning's gaze followed him, almost falling on the small plate of peach cake and couldn't tear it apart. The abdomen is empty, and the heart is itchy. Hearing him call herself for tea, the first thought that popped into her head was, "I can't go. Xie Wei is a husband, she is a student, she must be respectful, she has heard Xie Wei's rebellious words back then, she knows Xie Wei's unknown secrets, Xie Wei has moved to kill her. What if the tea is poisonous?" But the little plate of peach cake was there. After all, Jiang Xuning couldn't resist the temptation of that little secret, and got up and moved over. "It's not for food." Xie Wei asked her to go over for tea. How could she not obey? Jiang Xuning said thank you, sir, sat down in front of the tea table, glanced at Xie Wei, silently stretched out a paw, picked up a thin piece of peach cake from the small plate, and took a bite. The moment the pastry was entered, she suddenly moved. The little faint joy on his face also stiffened slightly. Xie Wei didn't care at first. He took a teaspoon and took the tea out of the teacan, looked up, and said, "What's wrong?" Jiang Xuning reacted and immediately shook her head, "It's okay. It's just different from what I thought." But when you stop and think about it, you can know what Xie Wei's identity is now, where is the place now, and where can you expect to eat a certain taste. It's best not to reveal the clues, otherwise he will be able to see it, and when he thinks of those things back then, God knows if it's a move and a murderous intention. She quickly buried her head and chewed slowly. The fluffy ingredients of the peach slice cake slowly melt in the mouth. If you ignore the overly sweet taste, it can be regarded as exquisite, and it is enough to eat 2 pieces to cushion the stomach and satisfy hunger. In front of Xie Wei, Jiang Xuning didn't dare to speak. She ate 1 slice and took another. Xie Wei looked at her eyebrows, but he finally noticed something, and asked, "The dim sum made in the imperial dining room is not delicious?" Jiang Xuning hurriedly shook her head. Xie Wei's gaze fell from her to the plate of peach cakes. He seldom used the dim sum that he had prepared for him, and now he only picked up a slice and took a small bite, and when the pastry reached the tip of his tongue, he raised his eyebrows slightly. Jiang Xuning was flustered for some reason. She didn't even dare to lift her head. Xie Wei slowly put down the unfinished peach slice cake, and looked at her quietly for a long time, until he heard that the water was boiling next to him. Then he looked away, picked up the water and poured it over the tea set, and began to make tea slowly. This time, Jiang Xuning knew what it meant to can't eat. Xie Wei didn't say anything else, only asked her about the literature she had learned a few days ago between making tea, and casually tested her knowledge. After 4 brews of tea, he asked her to practice the piano again. He didn't do anything anymore, sat back in front of the bookcase, stared at the zoo criticism on the letter, and looked at it for a long time. After more than half an hour, he said to Jiang Xuning, although the attitude is there, the foundation is still too thin. It is often said that diligence can make up for shortcomings, and it is not all right, but it cannot be wrong. That's all for today, and don't let up when you go back. From tomorrow, the grammar will also be examined, or at this time to the side hall. Jiang Xuning finally breathed a sigh of relief and got up to agree. Then he said goodbye to Xie Wei, and hurriedly retreated from the side hall with a little caution and slipped away. Xie Wei sat in the side hall for a while before leaving the palace with the recital. The Xie mansion and the Yanji Marquis mansion are only separated by a wall. The difference is that the Yanji home mansion is on the front of the street, and the Xie mansion is on the back of the street, and the two mansions are facing east and west, back to back. When he drove back to the mansion in his car, he had to pass through the mansion of the Marquis of Yanji, and it was easy to see the heavy soldiers surrounding outside, all of them looking at the people coming and going with cold eyes. Only then did he get out of the car and enter the house, and when he went up to the veranda, Jianshu walked towards him quickly and said in a low voice, "In addition to Mr. Gonggai, there are also people from us who said that I saw Ding Fei Gongzi coming out of Hung Yuan gambling house early this morning. But the place was mixed, and I didn't pay attention at the time, and I lost the people." Xie Wei stood under the porch and did not speak. Not far away, there was a sound of laughing and talking outside the side door, and someone said hello to the porter and walked to the house. When Jianshu heard it, he turned his head to look at it and laughed. "Lao Tao is back. He is the cook in the house, and he makes good dishes." Lao Tao has a big waist and a round waist, white and fat, but his face is full of joy, holding a vegetable basket in one hand, and carrying a fish in one hand. Seeing Xie Wei standing under the porch, he hurriedly leaned over to salute and said, "My lord is back. I bought a fresh big carp today, and it is alive. The pastries made a few days ago were also secretly eaten by the Dayakan boy, and I also bought a few caddies of glutinous rice and a caddy of peach kernels. You can try to make some peach slice cakes." Xie Wei looked at his full basket, lowered his eyes, and nodded. Asterisk. Jiang Xuning slipped out of the side hall of Fengchen Palace, until she walked far away and arrived at the door of Yang's Hizai, looked back at the side of the door, and saw that no one was coming, so she breathed a long sigh of relief. Eating a peach slice cake almost didn't scare me out of illness. I was so bold that I even dared to eat what Xie Wei gave, and I dared to go to Xiao to think that Xie Wei did it himself, and he didn't even want his life. Fortunately, the other party didn't notice it and got out safely. She patted herself lightly on the chest. When Yao Shi and Yu walked out of Yang's Hizai, they happened to see her like this, but what she remembered was the posture when she turned around to find Zhang Sha that day, and hatred came up for a while, so she smiled faintly and said, "Didn't Miss Zhang go to learn the piano? How can she come back like a thief? Isn't she trained by Mr. Xia again?" Jiang Xuning turned her head and saw her. Yao Shi's hostility towards her has gradually revealed itself these days, but there are more people who hate her. How old is Yao Shi? She's not yet at the point where she needs to pay too much attention. Jiang Xuning was not angry when she heard the sarcasm, who told her to play the piano well today, and barely deserved Xie Wei's praise. It's light if you don't go to the sky. She raised her eyebrows and smiled, looking idle, and said, that's going to disappoint Miss Yao. I can finally touch the piano today, and I just got Mr. Xie's affirmation. In the future, I will continue to work hard to live up to my husband's painstaking teachings to me. People in the world may not see their friends doing well, but they must be happy to see their enemies doing badly. If the person you hate is having a bad life, you will not be able to see it, and you will have a dark heart when you listen to the news from afar. Jiang Xuning is undoubtedly Yao Shi's enemy. But not only is she doing well, but she is telling others in front of her that she is doing well, and the relaxed smile between her eyebrows and eyes is like a needle, piercing people's hearts with blood. Yao Shi choked and stopped talking. Yu Yu was already afraid, and at this moment, she was even more closed and acted as a saw-mouthed gourd, without saying a word. Jiang Xuning clapped her hands and walked away from them briskly. Yu Yu looked at Yao Shi's face and said softly, maybe she has a swollen face and is fat, who doesn't know that she is famous for not learning and not knowing. Yao Shi took a deep breath and turned around. It's just that when I arrived at the door of Yang's Hizai, my eyes swept inadvertently, but my footsteps were stunned. Where Jiang Xuning was standing, a sachet fell. Yu Yu followed her gaze, and naturally bent down to pick up the purse, and turned it over to see that on the bottom of the moon, a delicate peony was embroidered with dark blue silk threads, with fine stitches, very beautiful. Isn't this Jiang Xuning's one? With some disgust in her heart, she pursed her lips and raised her hand to throw it into the corner of the flower and wood pot next to her. Unexpectedly, when Yao Shi saw it, he snatched it directly and looked at it in his hand. Yu Yu was a little puzzled. Do you want to give it back to her? Yao Shi's mind floated, but his eyes were cloudy, and he only said, it's just a small sachet, what's the hurry? Yu Yu stopped talking. Yao Shi stared at the sachet for a long time, then casually put it in his sleeve and said, it's not too late to return it to her when you come back. Seeing that she hangs every day, maybe it's still an important object, and it's okay to be in a hurry if you lose it and can't find it. Yu Yu then laughed, that's good. Jiang Xuning had just left, they picked up the sachet, and they didn't bother to turn around and call her, so they went straight to the Imperial Garden. A few days ago, the tiger hoof plum planted in the palace had bloomed. The Queen Mother's wind chill is also a little better. The Queen, in order to please, she invited the palace concubines to come out to enjoy the plum blossoms in the Imperial Garden. Because of Xiao Shu's face, the companions here can also take a look at the light and have a good time. This kind of thing, of course, Yao Shi and Yu Yu don't want to miss it. In the plum garden, the tiger hoof plum blooms early, and the plum also grows small flower buds. People walking in the garden are a little interesting. Yu Yu was born in Qingyuan Bafu. She is very humble and loves to make friends with people, not to mention that when she encounters such a once-in-a-lifetime occasion, she insists on flattering in front of the concubines and concubines of the palace, but Yao Shi is not very accustomed to it. She is from a beautiful family and disdains it. It was halfway through the banquet, so he didn't make a sound, leaving everyone and going to the outer garden to enjoy the plums. The plum garden is quite large. Yao Shi said that he was appreciating the plum, but looking at it, in this already cold day, he couldn't help but think of Zhang Xia that day in Sining Palace, and remembered the reply letter of resignation that he saw in his father's study. There was some desolation at the end. A secluded pavilion that is rarely visited on weekdays stands in the middle of the plum forest, and the plum trees around it are planted in clusters, but it looks dense. It's just that it looks gloomy, and it's a little scary. Yao Shi was not very bold, and as soon as he arrived here, he came back to his senses and wanted to turn around and go back. But he didn't think about it, and only after a few steps back, a sound of footsteps accompanied by a low conversation came from the other side of the plum garden. If the matter of fasting that day was not seen by the mourning family, with your thoughtfulness, let that little palace maid be tried in court, and if you are careless and not strict in your mouth, how should you deal with yourself? It's the niece who is confused and out of order. Everything is easier said than done, especially in the palace. No one is a fool. He acted rashly without even knowing the truth of his opponent, which was really too disappointing to the mourners. Now a Zhang Xuning is fine, you have made such a strong rival for yourself, and there is also a Zhang Suiwai outside, although she is not top-notch, she can compete with you academically, and it is very likely that she is the owner of Zhuer's embroidered handkerchief. You are not just confused. My aunt taught me a lesson. Empress Dowager Xiao walked in front, and Xiao Shu followed behind her. One of his faces was full of anger and couldn't be suppressed, and he scolded him harshly, but the other lost his former high-minded silence and listened quietly. Neither of them followed the palace people. Obviously, such words are not suitable for the palace people to follow and listen. Footsteps were getting closer. Yao Shisuri and Xiao Shu have a good relationship, and they are close, but they can't recognize the voice of the Empress Dowager Xiao, and they can also distinguish Xiao Shu's voice. Don't dare to show up at the moment. Seeing that the branches of a plum tree next to him overlapped and could hide people, he held his breath and hurriedly hid behind it, not daring to take a breath. Empress Dowager Xiao continued to walk forward, passed by the plum tree, and said, although you are a rare smart person in the Xiao family, you are still young, you have experienced too few things, you are not thoughtful enough, and you have not thought of enough contingencies, so you almost fell into passivity in the palace that day. And you don't even tell the mourner privately. When the mourner can't see what you want. Xiao Shu said, I feel ashamed of my aunt's teachings. Empress Dowager Xiao sighed and said, the saint experienced the rebellion of King Pingnan back then, and since then he has been suspicious, even he is not kind to the biological mother of the mourning family, and even chose a small family to choose the queen, and the people from the Xiao family did not even choose a concubine, so they were afraid of it. Zhuer has a gentle temperament and is closer to me. I know that you are also a man with great ambitions, and looking at the capital, the daughter of the noble, no one is more worthy of the position of mother in the world than you. Yao Shi hid behind the tree and didn't dare to move for a while, although she warned herself not to listen if she wanted to live, but her ears couldn't be sealed, and the voice kept coming, making her more frightened the more she listened. That day, it was Xiao Shu who framed Zhang Xuning. For the sake of Shenju, the king of Linzi, in order to become the queen in the future. Then I heard Xiao Shu say, Aunt means. Empress Dowager Xiao said coldly, as long as the saint is still there, if you want to make Zhuer the emperor's younger brother, you will not tolerate the daughter of the Xiao family to become the princess of Linzi, you have to be calm. Xiao Shu said, do you want to watch others take the position? At this time, the footsteps of the two were already a little far away, and the sound was also a little far away. Yao Shi swallowed his saliva, didn't dare to stay any longer, quietly bypassed the plum bush, and was about to leave. But who wants to be flustered and prone to mistakes? When she hurriedly bent over, she accidentally bumped into a plum branch, and suddenly the plum blossom shook, and the sound of branches colliding came out. Who's there? Empress Dowager Xiao turned around and rested in the distance, and could only see the plum branch moving, and subconsciously shouted. Yao Shi immediately knew that he had leaked his whereabouts, so he panicked and ran away. It's just that the fear is extreme, and evil thoughts also come up. Her eyes overflowed with ruthlessness, and her heart moved, so she reached directly into her sleeve, touched the sachet that she had just picked up, and threw it directly on the ground. Then he walked out of the plum garden quickly, turned around elsewhere, and then returned to the plum banquet. Asterisk. There are a bunch of concubines in the palace to enjoy the plum, and there is a Empress Dowager Xiao, so Zhang Xuning doesn't like to join in the fun. In the flowing water pavilion, Fang Miao was pulled by Zhou Baoying and sat there playing chess. She walked over and sat next to her, peeling the peanuts brought by the palace people and eating them, while watching the two compete on the chessboard. It wasn't until it got dark that the people who had gone to enjoy the plum blossoms came back. Seeing that chess was being played in the Liashui pavilion, everyone came over to see how much Zhou Baoying would win this game. Xiao Shu is also among them. Seeing that Zhang Xuning had already peeled a bunch of peanut shells in her hand, Xiao Shu smiled faintly, her eyes flashed slightly, and she raised her hand and handed a sachet to her, saying, "I just picked up something outside, it looks a little familiar, it's Zhang Er's, right?" Zhang Xuning was stunned and raised her eyes. The sachet hanging between Xiao Shu's fingers is the sachet embroidered for her by the silk farmer when Yu Fangyan made her first business before, and the dark blue peony is very unique and beautiful. When I looked down at my waist again, I don't know when it was empty. She raised her eyebrows slightly, took the sachet from Xiao Shu's hand, but she was not grateful, she was still a little cold, and said flatly, "It's mine, I don't know when it fell, but it's hard work." The side of the sachet was hooked by something, and it was a little fluffy. Zhang Xuning felt a little distressed when she saw it, and stroked it lightly before frowning and hanging it back on her waist. Xiao Shu looked at her quietly, observed her behavior, and easily felt that she was indifferent and didn't want to say much to her, but other than that, she was very calm. Yu looked a little confused in the back. Yao Shi's heart was like a drum when he saw this scene, and he almost didn't stand still. Chapter 84, Temper Tantrum. When something is lost and regained, it is naturally worth rejoicing. However, the person who returned it was Xiao Shu, which was somewhat strange, and Zhang Xuning was not very used to it. Fortunately, Xiao Shu didn't mean to talk to her about this, and left after returning the sachet. So she was also happy and continued to watch Zhou Baoying and Fang Miao play chess. This time, it's go. Fang Miao's hand has already entered the long exam, and he will be undecided for a while. Zhou Baoying looked bored, so she also grabbed the peanuts next to her to peel them, and turned her head to look at Yao Shi and Yu, and said curiously, "Did the two sisters also go to enjoy the plum?" Yao Shi was relieved to see Xiao Shu leave, but listening to Zhou Baoying's question, her heart couldn't help but tighten a little, and she smiled reluctantly, "I also went, but I didn't watch it for long, and I talked with the ladies of the palace." Zhou Baoying let out an "oh." She seemed to want to say something, but just at this time, Fang Miao fell with a snap, her eyes immediately looked away, and she immediately clapped her hands and laughed, "I knew that sister Fang Miao was going down here." Fang Miao saw where her fingers landed, and immediately shouted anxiously, "You, how can you get down here?" No, I haven't thought about it yet, I won't go down here. I have no regrets, sister." Zhou Baoying finally had to win another game, so she was not allowed to regret the chess easily, and the two started fighting on the chessboard. Yao Zike went through some dangers, only to feel exhausted, pretending to have nothing to do and watching in the Liashui pavilion for a while, before calling himself sleepy and walking out. Seeing this, Yu followed with a flash of her eyes. When Zhang Suiwai came out of her room, she happened to see the two of them coming back one after the other, and said hello gently, but maybe it was because she had refuted them in person before, and the expressions of the two did not look very close, and they looked a little weirdly cold. At this time, she didn't care. When I returned to the room after dinner, I noticed that Zhang Xunning's sachet had a scratch on it, so I asked, "What's wrong with this sachet?" Zhang Xunning glanced down and said, "I probably accidentally fell and was picked up by Xiao Shu, and when I returned it to me, it was already like this, so it was probably scratched somewhere. These things are all daughter's private property. She is used to being outside, and she doesn't care much about these subtleties, but Zhang Suiwei was raised in the mansion behind the high gate, and when she heard this, she frowned slightly, and said, "When did you lose it?" Zhang Xuaning's relationship with her was not close, and if it wasn't necessary, the two of them wouldn't speak. Now Zhang Suiwei took the initiative to ask. Zhang Xuaning knew what she was worried about after thinking about it. After all, if this kind of private thing went into someone's hands in the palace, and pulled out something about men and women, and fell in the eyes of people with a heart, it would be enough to make a big deal. She didn't reply, she just untied the sachet again and opened it directly. It was still filled with dried flowers and incense slices, but nothing else. It's just that there is a faint cold fragrance in the originally fine Du Ruo Fang's breath. It's very light, but you can still smell it. Zhang Xuaning's heart suddenly sank slightly, and what came to her mind was the plum banquet in the palace today that she didn't go. From going out this morning to having dinner in the evening, the place she has stayed and passed is only from Yangzhizai to Fengchen Palace, and there are palace roads in the middle, and there are absolutely no plum blossoms in the middle, not to mention that the tiger hoof plum is the earliest. Unless Xiao Shu uses plum fragrance. But as far as she knew, it wasn't. Zhang Suiwei just wanted to ask when she lost it, afraid that someone in the palace would make a fuss about the sachet, but she didn't expect Zhang Xuaning to frown after opening the sachet and smelling it slightly. She couldn't help but worry, isn't it? Zhang Xuaning's eyes were covered with a layer of gloom, and she only looked at the palace road outside the Yangzhizai gate and the door, and did not answer. She tied the sachet and saw that there was no one around, so she went straight down the steps and looked carefully all the way. When she arrived at the door of Yangzhizai, she suddenly remembered something and stopped. The gates of the palace are all wooden. At this moment, the two doors were not closed, and the round brass rings hung on both sides. But on the door on the left, which was about the same height as a person's waist, there was a wooden thorn protruding out, and a few extremely slender strands of moon-white silk hung on it. Zhang Xuaning took a closer look and found out. She gently raised her fingers to pick off the few strands of silk, and then spread out the sachet in her palm. The scratch on the sachet was still fresh, and the background color of the moon-white was exactly the same as the thin silk. Thinking about it again, when she returned from Fengchen Hall to fast, she did look back at this door. I think so, I should have lost it at that time. At that time, I met Yu and Yao Shi, but I didn't see anyone else. But this sachet was finally picked up by Xiao Shu, and there were a few wisps of plum fragrance on it. Zhang Suiwei knew that something was wrong when she looked at her posture. But Zhang Xuaning seemed to know what she wanted to say, so she only said, "Don't worry about it." After saying that, he took the sachet and went back to the room. After experiencing the last incident of being framed by Yangzhizai, Zhang Xuaning has been much more careful. After all, she is no longer the queen of the previous life, and the slightest conspiracy of others can put her in danger. Whether there is anything strange about this matter, let's talk about it for the time being. The important thing is, if there is something strange, what will be involved? The lamp was lit in the room, and the sachet and the strand of silk thread were placed under the lamp. Zhang Xuaning sat in front of the desk and looked at it for a long time. It's late at night. Soon the sound of laughter on the side of the flowing water pavilion became quieter, followed by the sound of Fang Miao and Zhou Baoying saying goodbye, about the end of the chess game, and the agreement to continue the battle tomorrow. At this time, Zhang Xuaning thought, instead of thinking and doubting here, it is better to find Xiao Shu directly tomorrow and ask preemptively. After all, what has not been done is not done, and if others want to frame them, it is inevitable that there will be inconsiderate and imperfections, and they will definitely show flaws and be discovered. Moreover, Xiao Shu is really not confused. As soon as she made up her mind, she planned to wash up and rest. Unexpectedly, as soon as I got up, there was a knock on the door outside. Knock knock. Someone knocked lightly on her door, followed by Zhou Baoying's soft and glutinous voice, "Sister Ning, have you slept?" Jiang Xuning was stunned. Whether it is in the previous life or this life, her intersection with Zhou Baoying is not deep. I vaguely only remember that this girl later married the king of Yanping, and she didn't want to do anything, and she studied eating and drinking all day long, but she was not at ease with ordinary people. Looking for food in the middle of the night? She stepped forward and opened the door, and said, "Anything else, shall I get you some?" Zhou Baoying had just come back from playing chess with Fang Miao, and stood outside the door a little shyly, as if she was embarrassed to find someone to eat like this, and when she saw Jiang Xuning opening the door for her, she smiled, jumped into the door, and said, "Thank you, Sister Ning. The pastries in the palace are given as usual. Zhou Baoying is delicious, she doesn't listen to her mouth all day long, and it is common for her to finish eating the pastries in her room." Jiang Xuning is the opposite. After entering the palace, he ate very little, and he was not very satisfied with the current cooks in the palace. She put all her plates of pastries into the food box and said, "I don't like to eat them either, why don't I give them to you?" Zhou Baoying bit her lip, "Ah, it's not big, right?" Having said that, his hand involuntarily stretched out towards the food box handed over by Jiang Xuning, clenched it tightly, and his eyes were bent like crescents, and he was so happy that he was bubbling. Those who are given food are good people. So in front of Jiang Xuning, she poured out a basket of good words. "I know that Sister Ning is good-looking and kind-hearted, and it hurts me very much. I also saw the sachet that Sister Xiao picked up for you today, but at that time I was standing on the porch, Sister Yaoxi and Sister Yu were at the door, and they had already picked it up first. I thought they would return it to you, so I didn't go over again. Seeing that they didn't say to give you the sachet when they came back, I wondered for a while, but fortunately, Sister Xiao actually took it out. Really, it would be nice if I picked it up, otherwise I wouldn't have eaten my sister's pastries for nothing." The two eyebrows were locked, and he looked a little worried. She spoke softly and glutinously, but the speed of her speech was not very slow, like pouring beans, with a rhythm of her own. I almost couldn't react to the words in the past. But when Jiang Xuning realized what she said, she suddenly raised her head to look at her. She was already slightly stunned, and her heart was shocked. Zhou Baoying seemed to be unaware of this, holding the food box in both hands, a little sad and embarrassed, gritted her teeth as if she had made up her mind, and said to Jiang Xuning, "That's it. This time I took my sister's pastries, and the next time the palace people bring pastries, I will give half of my share to my sister, and I will never regret it." Jiang Xuning. Zhou Baoying took her as if she agreed. "Then it's decided." "Thank you, sister, I'll go back." Jiang Xuning smiled faintly and said, "Go back and rest early." Zhou Baoying jumped out of the door again and waved at Jiang Xuning, "Sister, also rest early." After speaking, he happily carried the food box to his room, and before he could hold back halfway, he lifted the lid of the box and took a piece of almond crisp from it and stuffed it into his mouth, as if he was hungry. Jiang Xuning watched her back disappear into the corner of the corridor, and then lowered her eyes and slowly closed the door. But the mood was churning steeply. Sure enough, it's Yaoxi and Yu. However, she had suspected this before, so she was not very surprised when she heard about it from Zhou Baoying. What surprised her was that Zhou Baoying sneaked over to talk to her. It seemed inadvertent, but if she hadn't been aware of the strangeness of this matter before, it was enough to wake her up and make her vigilant. This little girl. Jiang Xuning couldn't help but smile, although she likes to eat and drink, but in the end, she is a chess idiot who can kill Fang Miao on the chessboard, and she is not as stupid as she seems. This is clever, and ordinary people don't have it. Asterisk. The next morning, when she got up early to go to class in Fengchen Palace, Jiang Xuning looked nonchalant. Xiao Shu is also ordinary. But Yao Shi didn't seem to sleep well, a little embarrassed, not very energetic. Chen Shuyi also teased her, "This little looks haggard, what do you want to go at night?" "Oops, I forgot, our Yao Shi girl is different, she is a person whose family affairs have been decided, of course you have to think a little more." If she had said this before, Yao Shi would have blushed with shame. This will be followed by a lively and cheerful atmosphere. Unexpectedly, after hearing her words, Yao Shi's face suddenly changed, and even became very embarrassed, raising his head and looking directly at Chen Shuyi. There was a bit of anger. Chen Shuyi immediately realized. The smile on her face froze, she stopped laughing, hesitated for a moment, and said, "What, isn't it not with that Zhang Shuren?" Everyone in the hall is clear about her and Zhang Sha's relationship. At first they knew that she was going to withdraw from her family, but then they didn't quit for some reason, and they seemed to be very satisfied with Zhang Sha after seeing Zhang Sha unexpectedly in Sining Palace. Talented and beautiful, although she is not the right person, if the woman has no complaints, she can also become a couple. According to common sense, this family business is naturally proper. Even if there was a letter from Zhang Sha who took the initiative to withdraw from his family, everyone didn't think it was a problem. Including Xiao Shu, everyone's eyes turned to look at Yao Shi. Yao Shi's fingers on the table clenched tightly. She only felt that these curious eyes were hidden in malicious exploration and scrutiny, and even had a faint expectation of waiting to see a good show. She has already read the letter that Zhang Sha insisted on retiring from her family, and she was coldly reprimanded by her father because of a joke in the Fengchen Palace. I hate it when I think about it. What I hate even more is that Zhang Sha dared to withdraw from his own kiss. Where will she put her in the back? At this moment, the concerned eyes of everyone did not relieve the embarrassment in her heart, but only increased the anger in her heart. But she would never say anything about it. What girl would like to say frankly that she was divorced? Yao Shi gritted her teeth, smiled at Chen Shuyi, but was not polite, and said, "That Zhang doesn't know what to do, he is from a small family, even if he has a talent, he looks cold, not to mention that he has asked someone to calculate, and he has a lonely star personality. So after thinking about it, forget it." Everyone let out an ah in surprise. Zhang Xuning had heard Zhang Sha say that she wanted to take the initiative to withdraw from her relatives, but at this moment, listening to Yao Shi's words, it was as if she had taken the initiative to withdraw from Zhang Sha's relatives, and she opened her mouth to say that Zhang Sha was the fate of the lonely star. What is the difference between this and what she discussed with Yu that day? Her face cooled slightly. Yao Shi deliberately glanced at her provocatively, and said meaningfully, "However, the people I don't look down on, those who come from small families want to come and ask for them. So it's a retreat, and maybe you can find a good one. Although it may not be able to compare with me, it can be said that the 8 kings of the people can look at the mung beans." Everyone else was confused. Only Zhang Xuning knew that she was scolding herself, and her chest was agitated for a while. But if she wanted to have a seizure, the other party didn't name her. If she jumped out, it would seem that she really had some ulterior relationship with Zhang Sha, and she would be in the hands of others. Just at this time, the gentleman who was in class arrived, and she forcibly suppressed the anger in her chest. It's just that the more pressure you press, the more intense this anger becomes. Today's study of books and etiquette, her face was not good during the whole process. The gentlemen in that hall thought that they had taught her wrongly when they saw her at first glance, and after knowing that Zhang Xuning had forced away the 2 gentlemen, they couldn't help but tremble, for fear that they would be the next one to suffer, so they didn't come to trouble her. When class ended, Zhang Xuning was going to go out of the hall, and Yao Shi also happened to come up. She didn't want to let it, and Yao Shi didn't want to let it either. The 2 squeezed. Zhang Xuaning's temper came up, and she frowned and pushed her directly, and said unceremoniously, "What are you robbing when I walk in front? Are you rushing to reincarnate? Yao Shi was also asked about her family by Chen Chuyi today, remembering the hatred of Zhang She's withdrawal from her relatives, and always felt that this matter had something to do with Zhang Xuning, so she was unconsciously going to oppose her and refuse to give in, but she forgot how unwilling Zhang Xuning herself was to endure her temperament. Was pushed by her, and she almost fell down one by one. The gentlemen in the hall haven't left yet, the palace people are standing aside, they are stunned when they see this scene, they can't believe that someone has such a hot temper, and they have a direct attack in front of everyone's eyes. Even Yao Shi didn't expect it. She was helped to stand up for a while, but when she reacted, she was furious. Zhang Xuning, what do you mean? Zhang Xuning sneered, I want to do what you mean. Shenzai didn't go so fast, she was still behind at this time, she didn't know what grievances and entanglements the two had before, and she was stunned for a moment when she looked at this meeting. Everyone else quietly looked at her expression. Yao Shi wanted to compete with Zhang Xuning, but when he looked back at Shenzai, who was paying attention to the progress of the matter, he withdrew his finger pointing at Zhang Xuning with great fear, and said hatefully, if you don't be a thief, you won't be weak-hearted, and of course you will be angry when you are a villain in secret. Zhang Xuning sneered lightly, you don't have to point to Sang and scold why, I advise you to restrain yourself, and be a man with your tail between your legs when you are retired, after all, a fate is good to get together and disperse, and others will not make noise everywhere. But if you die to save face and refuse to make others feel good, that person will have 11,000 ways to make you feel bad. If you dare to go out and talk nonsense, I will dare to let the whole capital know what you have done to be dismissed. Divorced. It turns out that Yao Shi is the one who was dismissed. Didn't he swear very confidently that Zhang Sha quit his relatives in order not to implicate her, as long as she refused, this family affair would be properly done? Everyone was stunned when they heard Zhang Xuaning's words. Looking at Yao Shi's gaze again, he suddenly felt a little subtle, sympathetic, and a little indescribable. Yao Shi didn't expect Zhang Xuaning to say this in front of everyone so unceremoniously, and was looked at by everyone. Her face was blue and red, and her body trembled with anger. Tears fall in a flutter. After all, the girl's family loves face, and she was slapped in the face by someone, of course, she was very aggrieved. Zhang Xuaning finally let out a bad breath, she didn't bother to look at her, flicked her sleeves and walked directly to the side hall. Anyway, she is domineering, and others can say whatever they like. It's just that she does what she says and does what she says. If Yao Shi dares to do the bullshit slander and suppression of Zhang Sha in the previous life, she will give up this life and not leave the capital to stir up peace in this Shura field, and she will fight her to the end and make her pay. Asterisk. There was a warmth in the side hall, and the earth dragon was burned in advance, and even the water for making tea was placed on the stove in advance. Xie Wei arrived early in the morning. On the edge of a small food box, a plate of peach slice cake rested on the corner of the tea table, but he looked at the faint green tea soup in front of him, a little distracted. Zhang Xuaning pushed the door in, and he turned his head and saw it. It's just that compared to the past, this face is condensed and cold, as if he has an enmity with someone. Xie Wei raised his eyebrows slightly. He wanted to ask again, who recruited you again? But when I thought about it, I asked it yesterday, and I didn't speak. Zhang Xuaning felt angry, walked over and bowed to Xie Wei first, and when he got up, he saw that he was looking at his expression, and he knew that he was happy and angry, for fear that Xie Wei would misunderstand, so he said, I just quarreled with a slut, don't blame sir. Xie Wei. These two words are used well, and they are really angry, and Ning Er never said such things in the past. In other words, if you can be worthy of the word slut, the matter must be very serious. He pondered that her belly was full of anger, and it didn't seem like she could play the piano quietly, so he pointed to the opposite side of him and said, sit. Jiang Xuning walked over and sat down. Xie Wei looked bitter and hateful, sat down and didn't move, so he lowered his eyes, took a sip of tea, and said lightly, "Wait for me to pour you tea." The tea was brewed by Jiang Xuning before she came and poured into the sea of tea. Jiang Xuning only reacted at this time. In the past, Xie Wei poured tea for her, which was the etiquette of the tea maker, and she didn't pay attention to it after only drinking it twice, and the back of her head was cold by him, so she quickly picked up the sea of tea, and saw that Xie Wei's teacup was put down, so she obediently refilled it for him first, and then turned to pour it for herself. She didn't dare to speak, so she took a small sip of the teacup in both hands. Today is the monkey quay. Obviously, it is also a royal tribute in the palace, with a smooth entrance and sweet teeth and cheeks. After drinking, you can still smell a little sweet. Sweet. Is this the smell of monkey quay? Jiang Xuning was stunned for a moment, her eyes rolled for a while, and she saw the plate of peach cake next to her. It's the same as yesterday. She was a little disgusted by the taste and didn't want to taste it a second time. After one glance, she took her gaze back and continued to drink tea. Xie Wei said, "Acting in the palace, restraint is the best, but you are making enemies everywhere. Why do you quarrel with others?" Jiang Xuning muttered, "I also know that my temperament is not suitable for staying in the palace, but you didn't give me a chance to choose." As he spoke, the sweet aroma wafted again. She couldn't hold back, and turned to look at the plate of peach slice cake again. It's so unpalatable, but the aroma is so tempting. What kind of trouble is it? The cook in the palace is full of bells and whistles, and his heart is bad. To be a man, you must have backbone. Don't stretch out your hand. Otherwise, if you can't finish eating for a while, you will have to stuff your scalp in front of Xie Wei, which is simply miserable. Xie Wei raised his eyebrows. Is this blaming me? Jiang Xuning was absent-minded. She didn't remember what she just said. She subconsciously said "ah," and immediately said, "Don't dare, don't dare." Xie Wei's gaze moved to the peach slice cake. He had already noticed that Jiang Xuning glanced at it more than once, and said, "If you want to eat, take it, no one will hold you back." "No, no, no, I'm not hungry." Jiang Xuning immediately shook her head and refused. Xie Wei. Chapter 85, Eaten. What kind of expression is this? Jiang Xuning glanced at him suspiciously, inexplicably a little cowardly, only suspicious that she had said something wrong. "Then I'll eat one." Xie Wei. Jiang Xuning immediately changed her words, "That's still not eating." Xie Wei suddenly felt a little funny. It's not laughing at Jiang Xuning. Laugh at yourself instead. He shook his head inexplicably, looking at the tea in his palm, but he remembered Yan Lin Lei, and said, "Bad temperament, bad temper, I haven't seen it yet, and I don't know what kind of demon Yan Lin has." "How do you mention Yan Lin?" "And I wondered why Yan Lin fell in love with her?" Jiang Xuning tugged at the corners of her mouth and muttered in a low voice, "So Yan Lin has someone to love, and you don't have a wife." But as soon as the words came out, she saw Xie Wei's eyes raised, and immediately said, "You're right, I don't know how to learn, I'm not worthy of Yan Shize." This person complained in his heart and looked like he didn't dare to deal with him, which made people laugh, but the corners of Xie Wei's lips just curved a little, and they sank down for some reason. Yan Lin. Yanji Marquis' mansion. Crown ceremony. Before you know it, the days are already near. After Jiang Xuning finished saying Fang Cai's words, she also realized this almost at the same time, and the relaxed affection on her face followed the silence. She still remembers the crown gift of her previous life. At that time, she didn't know anything about the situation in the government and the opposition, and she didn't know that the Marquis of Yanji was in danger at that time, and she had already made up her mind to work hard to be the queen, but it was not time to put it into practice. Unexpectedly, I missed the hour in the middle of the day. She was late. When her car arrived at the home mansion, the whole mansion was already full of blood, the armor was cold, and there was a crying and shouting inside, and the nobles who went to the banquet were so frightened that their faces and legs were weak, and they fled from it as if they were running for their lives. She grabbed someone and asked, "What's wrong, what's wrong?" No one answered her. She brought the birthday gift she had prepared and wanted to go in to find someone. But the soldier stopped her. She desperately wanted to get in. But at that moment a head rolled out of it and fell on the steps, splashing blood on the ground, and she was immediately frightened, and then turned her head to see that those with swords were looking at her coldly. I don't know who pulled her, but finally pulled her back. When she returned home, she fell ill. In other words, in the previous life, she didn't even be able to participate in Yan Lin's crown ceremony. Later, Yan Lin misunderstood that she was seeking advantages and avoiding disadvantages, and she knew that the home mansion was in trouble, so she deliberately did not come. After all, she told him soon that she was going to be queen. Later, the old boy who had experienced the wind, frost, rain, and snow, and returned to Beijing with glory and became a general, stood in her glorious palace, gently pressed her shoulder, helped her take off the golden step on her head, and said to her, "That day, I waited for my mother for a long time. Standing in the hall, looking at every guest who stepped in, full of anticipation, I always thought that maybe you would be next. But I waited one after another, and watched one after another. The king of Linza came, but you didn't come, Mr. Xie came, you didn't come, and even Xiao Shu came, but you didn't come. But I think that Ning Ning promised me that he would definitely come. So I waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited until the house was surrounded by heavy troops, and when the holy decree was raided, and when the steps were bleeding, and I did not wait until." Zhang Xuning had no way to defend herself. Or, for the old boy who is caught in hatred and darkness, all justifications pale in comparison. She could only close her eyes silently. In the previous life, all kinds of things suddenly surged back, and Zhang Xuning took a while before slowly looking at the teacup in his hand. The calm tea soup was like a small water mirror, reflecting the figure of Xie Wei sitting opposite her. She asked, "Yan Lin Guanli, I heard that Mr. Xie wanted to pick up words for him." Xie Wei said lightly, The man was crowned in his 20s, and only then did he start a family. The crown has words, which are used to explain the name and the Mingji. Although Xie Wei's age is not as good as other Hungru in the Shilin, but he is the prince and young master who presided over the banquet in Wenyuan Pavilion, and he has never heard of anyone who can ask him to enlighten or take words for whom. Yan Lin seems to be the first. And the only one so far. But Zhang Xuning didn't know what the word Yan Lin in the previous life was. Did she take it? After the disaster of the Yanji Marquis mansion, all topics related to the Yan clan became taboo, and no one dared to mention it. When Yan Lin returned to the court, no one could be intimate enough to call him. Maybe there was, but she didn't know. Xie Wei looked at her for a moment and said, "Now the High Gate in Beijing knows that the general situation of the Yanji Marquis mansion is not good, and although the invitation to the crown ceremony has been sent, there are few people who can respond. You don't look like you're kind-hearted, are you going to go then?" Zhang Xuning looked at him and said, "Yan Lin is my best friend. So no matter what the situation is, she is going to go, and in this life, don't be late, don't miss the hour, don't let the boy down again." After hearing this, Xie Wei raised his eyebrows, and sneered lightly. Best friend? He didn't know if he had anything to say. Anyway, he shook his head. He didn't say anything after all, and he didn't seem to have any intention to drink tea, so he just put down the teacup in his hand and said, "Let's practice." Zhang Xuning tea hadn't finished drinking yet, but she wasn't very thirsty, But after chatting about this topic, the anger that had been arguing with Yao Shi before disappeared easily. In its place is heaviness. She put down the teacup, sat down at the table to practice, and played colorful clouds chasing the moon to open her fingers. I played well yesterday, and it stands to reason that today will be better. Unexpectedly, there was no smoothness at all yesterday, sluggish and stumbling, and I played a wrong note in just a few sentences. Xie Wei turned his head to look at her. Zhang Xuning stopped suddenly, looking at the slender fingers pressed on the strings. They trembled slightly, uncontrollably, and even the strings that were pressed below trembled. She slowly removed her fingers, clasped them in front of her, and clenched them hard. But the trembling sensation was transmitted from the fingertips to the tips of the heart. She hung her head and closed her eyes. Xie Wei didn't scold anything for the first time, but said lightly, "If you can't be still, don't play. The Yanlin crown ceremony is imminent. It's okay not to mention it, but once you do, how can you meditate?" Zhang Xuning felt a cold peace in her heart, pressed by something heavy, and couldn't breathe. Even the flying eyebrows and eyes when she quarreled with Yao Shi just now were gone, and she replied in a low voice, "Yes." There was no sound in the Fengchen hall again. Xie Wei read the official document in front of the bookcase, but he didn't seem to be able to stand it very much. Zhang Xuning was in a daze in front of the piano table, and after a while, she wandered out of the world. After 2 moments, another eunuch came outside, and he told him that he was in danger. But seeing that Zhang Xuning was inside, she didn't speak. Xie Wei got up and said to Zhang Xuning, "Make your own tea and read a book, and rest for a while." When he had finished speaking, he walked out of the temple. The little eunuch followed him out into the porch, and whispered something in a low voice. Zhang Xuning couldn't hear clearly. She didn't dare to listen to Xie Wei's affairs. After sitting in front of the piano for a long time, I didn't feel it when I was in my trance, but when I came back to my senses, I felt that my body was a little stiff. This jiaoan was given by Yan Lin. The young man's fiery and sincere face was still floating on the water of memory, but the more she looked at this Qin, the more depressed she felt, so she still stood up, simply sat down at the tea table, and boiled water to make tea again. The plate of peach cakes was still sitting in place. Zhang Xuning happened to see it. When she drank the first tea, she didn't touch it. When she drank the second tea, she felt a little bitter in her stomach, and when she got the tea to the third brew, she finally felt that she had to eat something, so she stretched out her hand to the plate of peach cakes. Snow-white patches with patches of peach kernels dotted in the middle. At first glance, it looks similar to yesterday's. But if you look closely, it seems that each peach kernel is bigger than yesterday's. The chefs in the palace can't do anything else. All kinds of pastries look good and smell delicious, although the feeling after eating them may be different from what you thought. But after all, it's in the palace. Who cares if it's really tasty? Holding a thin slice of peach cake in her hand, Zhang Xuning stared at it for a long time, snorted in her stomach, and finally stuffed it into her mouth casually. The glutinous rice is kneaded together, which is flexible and soft. Sweet but not greasy, clear but not bitter. This taste. I didn't care about it at first, but the moment the taste melted on the tip of my tongue, Zhang Xunning's eyelids really jumped, and she almost choked to death with affright, and her hand shook and almost overturned the teacup. It doesn't matter what this peach cake tastes like. In short, it won't be made by the palace cook. In her previous life, she asked the chef in the palace who could make pastries to try them, but none of them could make the taste she wanted. It is even more impossible for a chef who has not changed in the palace in this life. What about this disc? Zhang Xuning only felt that what she had eaten just now was poison, so she raised her hand to press her eyelids and her heart, and she couldn't wait to spit out the piece she had just eaten. Oh my God, what the hell did she do? Is still the same sentence. How can she even dare to eat Siawei's things? Maybe it's this plate of peach cake to test whether she still remembers those things 4 years ago. Siawei is ruthless. It's all because he has been so kind recently, that he habitually gains inches and loses his vigilance. Calm down. Calm down. I just ate a slice. Siawei may not have counted. To the naked eye, this disc looks the same as before. If you fiddle with it again, you won't be able to see it. Jiang Swining hurriedly stretched out her hand and refiddled with the plate of peach slice cakes, covering up the gap left by the piece she had just taken. Then wait for Siawei to come back. But after waiting for a long time, Siawei hasn't come back yet. Jiang Swining vaguely smelled the faint sweet aroma again, and the eyes that were originally looking down at the tea turned to look at the peach slice cake, turned back, turned to look at it, and turned back again. In fact, this disc looks like a lot. If you eat another slice, you may not be able to see it. She turned her head and glanced out of the side hall door, and listened to the small voice of talking, and before she stopped, she became a little bolder, and then secretly stretched out her hand, pulled a piece out of the plate, and quickly stuffed it into her mouth. Look at that plate of peach slice cake again. Well, it's good, there's no flaw, it's just that the left piece looks abrupt, and it's inexplicably a little eye-catching. Jiang Swining felt that she couldn't let it go like this. It would not be good if such a dazzle attracted Siawei's attention.
扔掉.
That's too wasteful. So it's better to eat it. It's not like she steals it, it's not that she really wants to eat it, it's to make this plate of peach slice cake look normal. She swore that after eating this piece, she really wouldn't eat it, and if she ate it again, she would die. You can steal this kind of thing. There are 2 if there is 1, there are 3 for 2, and there are 3 for not far from addiction, and if you eat it one by one, you really can't see that there is much difference between this plate of peach slice cake at this moment and the previous one. The little claws of sin stretched out again. Really, the last piece, the last piece. Jiang Swining made an oath to the 10th piece of peach slice cake in her hand, and then bit down. Siawei happened to come in from outside the door at this time, and he didn't hear it clearly, so he only said, "What's the last?" Ahem, ahem. Jiang Swining was so frightened that she choked on the peach slice cake she had just eaten. She hurriedly poured herself half a cup of tea, so as to avoid the risk of choking to death, and turned around and said, "No, it's nothing, I said that the last tea was made, and I said Mr. Xie, why haven't you come back yet?" Siawei took a closer look. She did make tea, but this plate of peach slice cake was originally so little. He looked at Jiang Swining, smiling rather than smiling. Jiang Swining followed his gaze and saw that the small dish that was originally containing the cloud cake was. When did the plating become so sparse? No, 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 it doesn't matter. Maybe Siawei is lame. She smiled. I was a little hungry just now, and if I ate a little, I ate a little. Siawei raised his eyebrows. When I'm lame. Jiang Swining gritted her teeth. A little more than a little. Siawei then said, "Oh, how does it taste?" Jiang Swining thought that she couldn't remember the taste of the year, and opened her eyes and said, "Nonsense, it's almost the same as yesterday. The chefs in the palace are all bells and whistles, they look good, they can't eat, it's okay to drink tea and eat." Siawei suddenly felt. This girl may be really tired of it. As soon as the thought moved, he stepped forward and made a gesture to serve the plate, and said, "Since it is not delicious, you don't have to wrong yourself, just throw it out, and ask the palace cook to make a plate for Ning Er girl." Thrown. Jiang Swining blurted out, "Don't dash." As soon as she said that, she wanted to slap herself twice. Siawei stopped and looked at her with interest. Jiang Swining finally knew that she was not only a person with reverse scales, but also a person with a death hole. it is difficult to go from luxury to frugality. Growing up in the countryside, the appetite is not satisfied, and it is always remembered that after tasting the good. She was bleak in her heart, so she simply let it go. The dead pig was not afraid of boiling water, her face was expressionless, she looked at each other, her face was not red and her heart was not beating, and she said earnestly, "It's not so bad, you should be a person who abstains from luxury and is simple, and you can't waste it." Then he took the plate of peach slice cake from Siawei's hand. Siawei. If I had known that a plate of peach slice cake would be able to clean up this ancestor properly, I had spent so much effort before, coaxing and training, worried that she would not learn well. What was it for? Suddenly a little doubtful of your ability to see people? He chuckled inexplicably.